Make your choice. The Boeing 747 commercial airliner or a trebuchet. What? They're both great methods of transport. Anyway, FF10 and FF12 are both Final Fantasy games. I looked on YouTube for people's opinion and saw, wow, it's absolutely nothing in 17 years. This video took so long to make that it's now 18. But look at this, right? It's not like people are shy about directly comparing games in the series on YouTube, but I get it. Paradoxically, FF would not be the series we know without its commitment to evolution, trying new things with every title. But the PS2 era really tested this principle. How far can you go before your new game doesn't resemble its series anymore?
I'm gonna kill Praxis!
The first one's pretty safe. Whoa, a direct sequel, that's new. Oh, this isn't even the same genre. And what the hell even is this thing? Today we're talking about the bread of the PS2 sandwich, 10 and 12. Two games that are barely just similar enough to compare. The two biggest games on the best-selling video game console of all time. 10's reputation has clearly outshone 12's, and originally this video would lay out the reasons why, both in and outside of the games, but I couldn't just leave it there, man. As soon as my little baby self played these things, they left two unique and permanent dents on the inside of my brain, right around where social skills and common sense were supposed to go. This video's a way of giving back, as well as forming my long-brewing childlike wonder into words. If I'm going to the length of pitting two bad bitches against each other in a video, I want to be thorough. So yeah, FF10 won, commercially and critically. I think there's a few reasons for this. Some people would take it as proof that 10 is an objectively better game, but I don't quite believe that. You could argue 12 was disadvantaged from the start, no matter how good it was. If you want to examine why something is popular or not, quality is only one piece of the puzzle, right? These games didn't pop up in a vacuum. They were at the mercy of external circumstances like audience expectations, trends in the industry, and this one is extremely relevant: timing. As Square's first PS2 game, 10 really broke barriers, and they used this shiny new hardware to tell their story like they could not do before. The characters in the game talked all the time.
We can talk more.
The cutscenes were beautiful, almost lifelike, at least for that era. It led the way for FF and became many people's first example of how good RPGs could become with the new technology. Sound familiar? And consider this, a PS2 out of the box doesn't support online multiplayer. You need a special network adapter for it. Why do I bring this up? Well, 11 is an MMO. It dropped in 2002, just a year after 10, but it didn't make as much of a splash as it could have. Because of this hardware limitation, the number of console players who could play 11 was severely bottlenecked at launch, so while people were waiting for the next entry they could play, FF10 just got to stick in people's minds. Final Fantasy XII was meant to come out in 2004, but shit happened. Square merged with Enix and they decided to crank out 10 too. 12 was pushed back to a 2006 release, but hey, delays happen all the time, so as long as nothing big happens—
Oh, for fuck's sake.
12 is a bigger game than 10, and it's a technical improvement, no one's gonna fight me on that. But no matter how well they leveraged the hardware, consumers knew the next generation was just around the corner. This is especially egregious in North America, where the game came out 2.5 weeks before the PS3 did. That's not a lot of breathing room at all, especially for a game of 12's sheer size. And I didn't even mention the Xbox 360. Practically speaking, FF12 was a last-gen title at launch for most of the world. This isn't all to defend 12's honor and claim it's the superior game that got screwed over by bad timing or whatever. It's just an important piece of context that often gets overlooked. This is the obligatory part of the video where I tell you to play both of these games yourself before watching the rest. Real talk? Personally, I have never listened to someone when they say that, so you do you. I'm not your dad. Just be advised that this video is not a play-by-play of the plots of these games, so it obviously helps if you know what happens in them at least a little bit, and naturally there are heavy spoilers.
In the beginning.
First impressions matter, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna bend the promise I just made to you. I know I said I won't be recounting these games beat by beat, but I do want to pay extra attention to the introductions of both games, as they shed light on the approaches these games have to storytelling and might explain why these games were received in the way they were. So let's put them under the microscope. The opening credits for Final Fantasy X are a little slice of many of the things people love about the game. It's almost like we're intruding on a private moment of respite. We don't know any of these people yet, but we catch a glimpse of the weariness they're feeling, the tenderness we'll only understand when we obtain the context. None of this is communicated through words. The only thing we hear is the beautiful piano piece known as To Xanarkand. It's one of the most iconic Final Fantasy tracks in the series for good reason, and it gets us ready for a truly incredible soundtrack. Then, we hear it.
Listen to my story.
Holy fuck. The man in the video game just talked, and he will continue to talk for the duration of the game. 32-year-old James Arnold Taylor, a future voice acting goat, is telling you to listen up because he has shit to say. FF12 used to have a pre-rendered cutscene that played before the title screen, but that was basically just a supercut of pretty moments from the game. The actual intro cutscene is this one. How's that for a change of pace, huh? Immediately we get something that 10 never gave us. Any semblance of a calendar year. We get treated to a few shots of a bustling, living city. People are going about their business and sorry, I blacked out for a second. There's a royal wedding happening and everyone's invited. It's a lovely image, it's happy, it's grandiose, and unlike FF10's opening credits, it's anything but intimate. It is incredible just how quickly these opening cinematics reveal the scope of their respective game. 10 feels personal, the focus is on the main cast, but 12 uses its first moments to build up the world of Ivalice. This becomes even more apparent later in the cutscene, but let's see how 10 is doing. When you actually start the game, you're not in some ruins, and you're not in a fantasy city such as Rabanastre. This is a bona fide metropolis, a place vaguely futuristic in that charming way early 2000s media can be. What's more, we're not some Joe Schmo, we're Titus, the Titus, star player of the Zanarkand Abes. People often confuse him with a guy named Titus, but that's someone else entirely. Life is great for our protagonist, but the somewhat dreamlike quality of Zanarkand is a little off-putting from the very get-go. There's already mysteries hanging over the player. You're thinking, why does this place have such a different vibe to what I saw in the opening credits? How do we get from here to there? And what in the name of God is Blitzball? Those are all pertinent questions, but before that, I just want to highlight something. A little monologue that often gets forgotten because it's the filling of an iconic moment sandwich. It's sad people don't discuss this part more because it's genuinely brilliant, and to make up for this, I will play some of it to you right now.
I was in a coffee shop running away from home when I heard the news. Our hero, checked, gone, vanished into thin air. My dad must have been his biggest fan. I knew how sad he'd be. Heck, we all were that day. Zanar, I says to myself, what are you thinking? I went running straight back home. We sat up talking about Jack all night. My dad and I never talked so much. Whoa, didn't mean to reminisce, folks.
I know parasocial relationships are the talk of the town, but we've all rooted for someone before. We live in a time where a person's actions can touch hearts across the world. We all have idols, and when they die, it doesn't matter that you've never met them before, it still feels like a loss. They impacted you even if they didn't know it. Jecht was that kind of man for the people of Zanarkand. A personality larger than life, an icon whose absence is still felt a decade later. So isn't it really interesting when Titus, his own son, doesn't seem to miss Jecht at all? You wonder how an icon to so many can be disliked by someone we assume was close to him. This isn't some hot new character dynamic straight off the shelves, but the announcer's monologue sells it completely. I am fully on board that Jecht was the goat of Blitzball, whatever that is, and I am frothing at the mouth to find out why Titus followed in his old man's footsteps without actually looking up to him. Oh hey, it's the reason people forget that part. Every player of this game has a moment where they realize that's what Blitzball is? It's a perfect mix of silly and awesome that fits FF10 so well. This cutscene is genuine kino, it gets me hyped up for this game every time. It almost gets me enthusiastic to play Blitzball, almost. We also catch a glimpse of the coolest motherfucker in the game while the city falls under siege from a massive malevolent force. FF10 really puts its best foot forward. In a very short amount of time, it's built anticipation for what's to come, introduced two promising characters in Titus and Jecht, and it's carved out an identity for its world in the form of Blitzball. It's completely okay to hate Blitzball. I find playing Blitzball to be a chore, but you cannot deny it's memorable. Narratively speaking, this dumbass underwater sport does so much for the game on several levels, but more on that later. Back in FF12, things have taken a turn. Never mind the wedding, the nation is at war. It's serious time. So many things get name-dropped. Naburis has fallen. I don't know what that is, but it sure has fallen. The big bad Arcadian Empire is attacking Dalmasca. There's battle plans being drawn up. The guy who just got married is leading troops. We are getting geopolitical in this bitch. Check out this transition to the Battle of Nalbana. Boom. Sam Raimi wishes he was that. The battle itself doesn't disappoint either. People kinda unjustly compare this game to Star Wars, but the energy of this scene is Lord of the Rings all the way, plus airship combat and energy shields. The fight turns sour, and Rassler, the guy who just got married, gets quickscoped. His partner retreats with him in critical condition, and the Arcadians take the fortress. Rassler didn't make it. His new marriage was tragically cut short. I have issues with this opening cinematic, but at the same time I find it difficult to criticize. The problems with it might just be endemic to the kind of story FF12 is. What 12 lacks in intimacy, it makes up with sheer scale. In order to keep up with all the politicking and moving parts later on, the player needs to be front-loaded with context. There's no time to zoom in on a nuanced character dynamic so early on, because when you're dealing with a story this large, you need to zoom out a lot more to give the audience its bearings. On one hand, it's very impressive. The world of Evil East looks very inviting. The issue that this creates is that we get a lot of facts right away without a concrete reason to care. No one's pouring one out for little Rassler over here. We literally learn his name right before he gets shot. Oh, so that's why... The geopolitical stuff is obviously the bread and butter of this game, and the opening hints at what's to come, but unfortunately this game doesn't have Blitzball, or, you know, something like it. After watching this opening cutscene, you get the feeling this universe is big and beautiful, but there's no single iconic trait that you can latch onto. After the title card, we get treated to some narration. Marquis Ondor, the writer of this memoir, fills in the gaps of what we just saw. Rassler and Ash's marriage was a political one, and their kingdoms are caught between Arcadia and Rosaria. The Battle of Nalbina was so catastrophic that Dalmasca basically has to accept peace with Arcadia at any cost. The king goes to Nalbina to sign the treaty, but it's foreshadowed that things are not gonna go to plan. So I'm tempted to say one way to fix FF12's opening is to put all the political stuff into this memoir and make the cinematic more personal. Maybe show the events through the eyes of an ordinary Dalmascan. Maybe some kind of protagonist, perchance, maybe? Then we let the memoir fill in the gaps that some ordinary Dalmascan wouldn't know. On second thought, that might make the memoir uncomfortably long and overwhelm people more than even canon does. Yeah, I don't know, man, it's a tough puzzle. It's a lot to fit into a few minutes. This is kind of just a slow burn situation, I feel. Back in Zanarkand, the city is in chaos, and we bump into Orin, who is awfully nonchalant about this. Oh yeah, there's also this.
It begins. What? Don't cry.
This'll get explained like 15 hours later, don't worry. Orin leads us towards the kaiju in the sky, which is named Sin. He hands us a sword, apparently from Jecht. My old man? Sin spawns some minions to block our path, and the combat tutorial begins as we carve our way towards Sin. In the midst of all this fighting, Titus finds a moment to snark at his dad's billboard. Then and only then, he's like, hey Orin, maybe we should run away from that eldritch horror. This is most likely self-preservation talking, but I like to think Titus saw Jecht and he was like, aw hell, that's right, Jecht died. If I approach that thing, I might die too, and that'll make me just like my old man. I gotta get out of here.
We're expected.
Huh? Give me a break, man!
We continue fighting and reach Sin. Up close, its power is even more oppressive. It seems to draw the city into itself and devour it piece by piece. We never had a chance of beating this thing, but it seems Orin never wanted to. He talks to Sin while Titus hangs on for dear life, and standing over Titus, he tells him,
This is it. This is your story. It all begins here.
With that, Orin and Titus are engulfed. In some weird dream, Titus sees a young version of himself. Like FF12, this game has narration, but rather than providing context to global events, it lets Titus tell the reader what he's thinking at several points in the story. He drifts in and out of consciousness, wondering what the hell just happened. His world has just been torn apart and he wishes there was someone, anyone with him to share this with. He wakes up in an unfamiliar ruin, not to be confused with the ruin we are familiar with. Meanwhile, FF12 has decided to throw us a bone.
You there? Can you hear me?
The game finally puts us into someone's shoes. A familiar face kneels over us, Rassler's companion.
It's as I feared. They're slowing us down.
Another voice complains that there's no time for us, but he refuses to leave a man behind. Our name is Rex, and we're a soldier of Dalmasca. Rex is young, a lad of 17 years, almost too young to be a soldier, but Rex insists he wants to defend his country and his brother at home. We finally learn Bosch's name.
I'm Captain Bosch von Rotzenberg of Dalmasca.
After so much build-up, it's nice to properly meet some characters. This little dialogue with Bosch is short, but establishes him really effectively. Then after helping this boy stand, he immediately solos like 6 Imperial soldiers. It's a shame that it took this long for FF12 to attempt characterization because it succeeds the first time of asking. The game wants us to look up to Bosch, and yeah, I'd die for this dude. In contrast to the Vossler, who is laser focused on the mission, Bosch still has it in him to care about his subordinates. He manages to show compassion without appearing fragile. All that from one scene. You might think I'm exaggerating, but no, FF12 is capable of some great writing. The opening cinematic kinda had me worried, but now we are in it. Bosch teaches us how to walk and talk, and then we learn a third thing: fighting. This is significant in itself because of FF12's combat. The fact that you can seamlessly battle enemies and run around mid-fight is one of FF12's biggest talking points to this day. Some people love it, some fools don't. I'll dive into it properly later, but for any long-time Final Fantasy fan, this was a shock to the system. The era of random encounters that carried this series from conception is dead. While our squad battles this Arcadian airship, I should remind viewers what we're doing in Nalbina in the first place. It's a little unclear, but the battle for Nalbina is over. The Arcadians won that. The King of Dalmasca sees no way to save his country but sue for peace and become a puppet leader, so he's come to Nalbina to sign the treaty. Bosch, who was in Nalbina and saw it fall, is now back in Nalbina because the Dalmascan Knights suspect a scheme. A bit of tomfoolery, if you will. They're trying to reach the king before he signs the treaty because they fear what the Arcadians might do to him once it's been signed. That's basically... Wait, did you just see that? Bosch, what the fuck just happened? What did you just do? Let's ignore that, we have a king to save. The squad races through the fortress, cutting through some Imperials and running away from others. Rex stays behind to hold off some pursuing Imperials. This 1v3 fight is the first true test of what you've learned so far, but it's not so bad. Its true purpose is to separate you from the squad. Rex catches up, but he's too late. He's arrived to a bloodbath. Dalmascans and Arcadians alike are strewn about the floor, and on the throne is the king, lifeless.
Your Majesty.
His captain, the same captain who picked him up and asked him his name, just buried a blade in his gut. Bosch didn't agree with the king's choice to bow to Arcadia and took matters into his own hands. As Rex's consciousness slips away, the Arcadians burst in and apprehend the Kingslayer. The Arcadian emissary taunts Bosch. His rashness has doomed his country. Now that Dalmasca has no leader, the Empire has no choice but to continue its invasion. Betrayed and bleeding out, Rex calls out for his brother.
Vaughn.
This is the kind of intro sequence that really benefits from a repeat playthrough. If you're a first-time player, you might be too confused to really appreciate the events. I don't mean to say this in a CinemaSins way. I can forgive a piece of media for not explaining everything on screen immediately. My problem is that FF12 pulls the rug out from under you repeatedly here. There's a lot of important-looking people around discussing a political narrative that you're trying to understand while chaos ensues on the battlefield. Suddenly, you're thrust into this important rescue mission, but before you know it, the guy you might have been fooled into seeing as the protagonist becomes a casualty. This is all very intriguing, but when you're not anchored to a character to filter these things through, it's easy to feel lost. Rassler is dead on arrival, and Ash is even deader on arrival, having died off screen without a line of dialogue to her name. Rex turned out to be a decoy protagonist. Bosch was the standout character, but when he betrayed the king, he crossed the line into villainy where the player can't follow. But when you start the game again and know what really happened in Nalbina, you really appreciate the gears behind everything going on. Not that there weren't hints. If you listened carefully, you might have noticed that Bosch here,
You're barely old enough to be a man.
and Bosch here
The king intended all along to sell Dalmasca to the Empire.
sound different. The first time round, you're too disoriented to really put thought into it, and there's no indication Bosch straight up has a twin brother, but it's satisfying to see these things fall into place with hindsight. You get to really enjoy the spectacle of the wedding, the battle sequences, and the utter shithousery of Vane's plan when you're not wondering what the hell is going on. You know who else is lost? Titus. Whatever this place is, he's by himself, and God knows where Orin is. He may stumble across a glyph with writing on it, but it's in a language he's never seen before. The structure he walks on collapses around him, and he fights off massive underwater creatures before he gets chased into the ruins' interior. It caves in and he's left to find a way out. I can't really describe the situation better than the man himself.
I had made it out of the frying pan, and into the freezer.
In this moment, Titus is the king of sad, sopping wet little men, and you can't help but feel bad for him. He's been ripped from a life of stardom into a survival situation. The next section is kind of a breather. You get to process all the weird shit that just happened while Titus searches through this ancient ruin for flint and tinder. I do appreciate some good pacing. The action gets broken up with a nice morsel of character development. When he manages to start a fire and dozes off, a recent conversation with Oren plays in his mind. Jecht has been gone for 10 years, and Oren is surprised that Titus isn't crying, but he did cry.
You cried.
The game keeps Titus's relationship with Jecht vague for now, but it seems clear that Titus's feelings are strong, whatever they are. Titus wakes up to see his precious fire blink out. As he struggles to save it, a creature ambushes him. We try and fight it, but it's a tough cookie, and just when things look dire, a bunch of people blast their way into the room. Other humans! Yes! This unknown girl helps us beat the creature, but our victory is short-lived. The men grab Titus, saying words we can't understand, and point their weapons at him. They want to kill him, but the girl argues with them and talks Titus down from an execution to a kidnapping. Next thing we know, we're on the deck of a ship in the middle of nowhere. I find it funny how in FF10 the player isn't omniscient like they are in 12, but the game still wants to bring us to several locations in a short span of time. And the answer to this is just to yank Titus around from place to place against his will. This does mean Titus doesn't really have much agency at all so far, but he still got opportunities for his personality to shine through. Speaking of characters, I am pleased to announce the first real player character has graced FF12 with his presence. Vaughn, Rex's brother. And don't worry, Vaughn is here to stay. His first impression is pretty decent. He kills some rats in the sewers and emerges out into Rabanastre. We're 2 years into the Arcadian occupation, and things are rough. The Arcadian soldiers aren't treating the townspeople with much dignity, but Vaughn isn't taking this lying down. He yoinks the soldier's money pouch and disappears into the crowd. He doesn't have much time to enjoy his spoils before Penelo enters the scene. Enjoy this scene because it's like half the development Penelo ever gets. Vaughn and Penelo are two of many orphans left to fend for themselves in a post-war Rabanastre. It's all they can do to survive, but Vaughn has grander dreams. An airship flies overhead, and Vaughn wants so desperately to be in one of those. A sky pirate free to go wherever he pleases. As for Penelo, she's clearly the one who keeps Vaughn accountable. She's the realist to Vaughn's dreamer. But importantly, she never discourages him outright. Even if his dream is silly, there's something about his childish ambition that Penelo appreciates. This is a tried and tested character dynamic, but it's tried and tested for a reason, and it's a good starting point for our heroes. Speaking of budding character dynamics, Titus is busy absorbing the local culture. But it turns out the girl was able to speak his language all along, and she explains that they found a wrecked ship beneath them, and they want him to help them check it out. To his credit, Titus takes this forced recruitment pretty well. I guess he didn't have much choice in the matter, but he's got a good attitude about it. He and the girl dive in. Given this next section is underwater, there's no dialogue, but we do get introduced to the main character progression system in this game, the sphere grid. We're kind of alone with our thoughts for this part, free to take in the atmosphere and get familiar with the leveling mechanics. Long story short, we activate some switches and fight a boss that introduces the concept of trigger commands, which are situational moves in certain boss fights, such as positioning the party for a pincer attack. After beating it, we resurface, and Titus finally has a proper conversation with his saviors/captors.
Today's subject: slavery.
Despite his help, the poor guy hasn't earned a seat at the table, but the girl comes out to give him some food, which he devours. And I mean devours. The girl's name is Riku, and she's an Albed. When Titus tells her he's from Xanarkand, she's immediately confused. He tells her about the Xanarkand Abes, Oren, and Sin's attack, but for some reason, she doesn't take what he says at face value. Kindly, she explains that Sin's toxins have a way of messing with your mind. You see, Titus's story makes no sense. Titus can't be from Xanarkand. Xanarkand is a holy site. No one has lived there for 1,000 years. Say what now? People get annoyed at how petulant Titus is, but if you got tractor beamed out of the neighborhood you've lived in since childhood and then got told you might have hallucinated your entire life and this shitty, cold world is what's actually real, you would freak out too, be honest. Riku offers to bring him to a place called Luca in the hope someone will recognize him there. In a meta sense, you kinda know Titus's memories aren't some delusion, but Titus doesn't have that luxury. I don't blame the man for having a crisis. Either he's lost his mind or he's been shunted 1,000 years forward in time. It's a good thing Sin is such a nice guy because it doesn't let Titus wallow in angst for long. Here we go again. Just when we thought the adventure would start with Riku, Titus, and the Albed going to Luca, Sin has other plans. Vaughn meets up with Miguelo, a shop owner and the closest thing Vaughn has to a caretaker. Miguelo sends Vaughn on a pretty boring job over in the local tavern, and though Vaughn grumbles about it, he doesn't say no. We do what needs to be done, but something in the tavern catches Vaughn's eye. This little freak of nature. When a nasty monster shows up, people put up bounties to get someone to kill it. Now this is the kind of work Vaughn can get behind. He takes the job to kill the rogue tomato and also learns about licenses, a major part of FF12's progression system. Then, the game lets us loose. You can go off and kill the rogue tomato immediately, but hold up a minute. You could also admire the architecture. Elegant yet whimsical in its execution. Or maybe go on a shopping spree with your rat money. Or live out the ultimate fantasy and actually have a conversation with someone on the street. Even in the limited space you have unlocked, the possibilities are many. When you decide to go after the rogue tomato, you properly realize how massive this world is compared to previous titles. There's something awe-inspiring about taking your first steps into the Ester Sand and realizing, oh my god, it's huge, and you can walk everywhere. This is the first proper dungeon in the game, and this zone by itself has more walkable area than a majority of FF10's maps. You can stretch your wings here, explore, open chests, fight wolves at your leisure. You even get an implicit lesson about passive enemies that have green health bars that won't attack you unless provoked. The Cactoids introduce the concept, and then this wild saurian serves as a test of your understanding. This is the first of several times the game features a random enemy roaming the map that is way above your pay grade, and I love it because the game's mechanics reinforce what the narrative has been saying all this time. The world of Ivalice is massive. It doesn't revolve around you, and you dabble with fish bigger than you at your own peril. In general, FF12 pulls this feeling off flawlessly, and it's one of the game's greatest strengths. After learning that harsh lesson, we kill the rogue tomato. You'd think people would be more worried about the T-Rex right outside the city, but I guess he's just a chill guy. Titus wakes up in a nice place for once, and things are looking up for him. He gets pelted by a blitzball, but it's okay. He gets to show off his skills to the dumbfounded islanders. He's in his element, he's got these dudes stroking his ego, they want to know who he is, and he tells them. He's Titus, and he plays for
the Xanarcanabes.
Ah, shit. Riku was not just gaslighting him. Xanarkand really is some kind of taboo. Titus invokes the Sin's toxin defense, and the islanders are just glad he survived it all. This is Waka, the village idiot, which is a very competitive field this part of town. He's a devout follower of the beliefs of Yevon, and he gives our little amnesiac a little sermon. Sin isn't just a monster, it's divine punishment for humanity's misdemeanors. According to Yevon, humanity has had it too good for too long with their use of Machina. Machina is evil, and Sin is there to enforce that. Titus, bless his heart, doesn't really have much of a choice but to pal up with Waka, but thankfully he seems like a cool enough guy. He offers to bring Titus back to his village and we accept. Somewhere inside Titus, a bit of hope kindles. If Sin shunted him into the future, it might be possible that Sin could bring him back to the past. Clinging onto this theory like a lifeline, Titus comes along with Waka to Besaid village. Just before we transition back to FF12, I wanna ask, where the fuck does this blitzball go? And why is no one freaking out that Titus thunder punted one of their only... well, actually, this ragtag bunch of villagers has quite a few. It's funny, I didn't think twice about this as a kid, but we were warned about Yevon's true nature very early on. For a nation reset to the pre-industrial era, they have no problem mass-producing these things. This might just be down to Square being too lazy to make multiple models, but the pieces line up all the same. Nice. By the time Vaughn gets back to town, the consul's parade is starting.
This gate's closed until the ceremony's over, do you hear?
Wait a second. How come you let these chocobos through the gate and not us?
Keep your distance. We don't want the chocobos sticking a peasant.
Miguelo comes in clutch with a bit of bribery, and Vaughn and Penelo run to see the new consul. This is Vane Solidor. If your neurons are firing, you'll recognize him from Nalbina. He's the heir to the throne of Arcadia, and clearly bad news. Before he goes up to the podium, the people hate him. But he's a clever speaker, positioning himself as a man of the people. With some clever emotional rhetoric and flattery, he presents himself not as a ruthless colonizer, but someone who stepped in as a matter of necessity. He accepts that the people may never truly like him, but he will do his duty in defending Dalmasca nonetheless. He wants to work together with the people to protect the kingdom from the unreasonable ones who would still fight and disturb the peace. He actually wins some applause. Vaughn and Penelo don't look too convinced, but to a lot of people, Vane looks like a step in the right direction to getting some semblance of their own life back. Oh dear God, what happened to your face?
Take this cathedral, for instance. Elegant, yet whimsical in its execution.
Hey, that's what I said. Miguelo, as the organizer of tonight's party, has to survive a conversation with him, but Vane is trying really hard to appear casual and down to earth.
That's enough of highness. Why don't you call me Vane?
I could not. That would not be right.
You are overly fond of formalities. I've just the remedy for that. Tonight you will join me, and we shall until you call me by name.
Vaughn is not buying any part of this, and he's furious that Megillo is trying so hard to appease the enemy, but Penelo knows there's no choice in the matter. The Arcadians won. They have all the power here. Beneath all the pleasantries, Dalmaskins must cooperate or die. Vaughn is not satisfied with this, and the beginnings of a plan hatch in his mind. While everyone's busy partying it up in the royal palace, if he can sneak in, he can steal some Dalmaskin treasure. It's better than the Arcadians having it after all. Penelo is completely against this. It's too risky. She needs him. She shoots down his idea and heads off, but privately, Vaughn's mind is made up. I'm gonna cut off the play-by-play here. That should be enough to understand how different these games are in attitude to storytelling, scope, basically fucking everything. I have a lot more to pick apart about FF12's intro than 10's. This doesn't mean 12's intro is bad, it just means 10's is masterful. And I really do mean that. It's like a window into 10's finest qualities, such as compelling characterization and solid, consistent pacing. FF12's intro is good, but I don't think it puts its best foot forward in the same way. The opening cinematic whizzes by, then the events at Nalbina hit you like a truck, and then suddenly we're Vaughn, LARPing as an exterminator. I guess this is a good way to depressurize the player and let them think about what they just saw, but in practice, maybe it's just my goldfish brain, but when I took control of Vaughn, all the shit that happened up to now got filed into the if it's actually important it'll come up later folder. Vaughn and Penelo have a strong first showing, and finally being able to explore some of Ivalice feels incredible, but you can't shake off the fact that you're being distracted with busy work. Hell, even after Vaughn decides to break into the palace, we still need to go make ourselves a shiny rock before we even think about going in. It's pretty fun, it's great.
Hey, Buckethead!
But after all the high-stakes political struggle, it feels weird. And if you decide to do the optional hunts that pop up around this time, it only widens that gap. There's a misconception floating around that FF12 has a weak story, but it's not that simple at all. The plot is quite good, but the hands-off, open-world structure of the game makes it very hard to give a shit about it. I'll prove this with a mathematical argument. FF10 big game, many cutscenes. FF12 much bigger game, but way fewer cutscenes. Is that to say FF12 should have been shorter and more linear to make the ratio work better? No. God, no. The game owes its life to the fantastic and plentiful side content, but it doesn't serve the story at all. Now, it is side content by definition, it's not meant to affect the plot, but I think a serious opportunity was missed in not having the characters react to basically anything outside of the main story. I'm not saying the side content is bland, on the contrary, it is incredibly flavorful, and the game is so much better for it. Here's a few of my favorites. There's a hunt given by an Arcadian soldier in Rabanastre who paid out of his own pocket to keep the citizens safe, to the ridicule of his superiors. From the very first battle, we're trained to recognize this suit of armor as a faceless mook, so it's touching that one of the most genuinely kind motives for putting up a bounty comes from him. There's a herd of cockatrices that ran away from their pen and we're tasked with rounding them up, since we recently got the ability to talk to them. Don't ask. There's a side quest where a family of cactoids has taken an entire village hostage and marched them across the world in search of the cactoid mother's son. Fortunately, we've seen this guy before. Unfortunately, this was the flowering cactoid, a hunt that we have previously killed. It seems all hope is lost, but thankfully, we gave the flower on its head to a villager for medicinal purposes. And when we take a look at the remains, a brand new cactoid emerges. Could this be considered the same cactoid we once met on the field of battle? Or has this flower just birthed a completely new person? Can its crimes from a past life be forgiven? Well, his mom accepts him, so it's all good. The side content brings a lot to the table. Humor, fun, and some genuinely heartwarming moments the historians of Ivalice will never write about. But when the party was pressed for comment about the communities they're helping, they had this to say.
We do not care.
Now, to be clear, FF10 is not much better. Titus doesn't have any zingers for when he fills out the monster arena or dodges 200 lightning bolts, but in FF10, the side content isn't half the damn game. It's just so much time spent without any input from the party. There actually is one occasion, where we do get their thoughts, and it's bittersweet, because it's great, but it makes me sad that there isn't more. If you enter the Necrohall of Nabudis any time before reaching Arcades, you get a brief cutscene that basically reminds you that Nabudis, yeah, the same Nabudis that has fallen, was wiped out in an explosion caused by Nethicite and were not meant to be here. But near the end, there's a shot of Ash lost in thought, and Fran asks her,
Is it revenge that you desire?
Nethicite is scary, but it's oh so powerful, and Ash is always seeking power. This is Nabudis. Her own husband was born here, lived here, until Nethicite made it a ghost town, and it could also be Arcades if Ash chooses this path. It's one thing to talk about taking revenge in the abstract, but now she looks upon the horrifying logical conclusion. She doesn't answer Fran's question, there's no more discussion of the topic, but this little scene makes such an impact.
Now where the fuck are you hiding the rest of these, Square Enix?
I know this is a big ask, it's a lot of effort for something a player might never see, and you might potentially have to make several versions depending on where they are in the main story, but I think it would have been worth it. Sure, not every hunt and optional area has such a convenient narrative tie-in, but that's an opportunity. That's a great spot to develop the party's interpersonal dynamics outside of the context of the plot. Hell, even if you don't want to voice it, just add an extra page to the bestiary and stick in a few lines of banter about that perverted slime monster we just killed. The crazy thing is, even without the side content, if you just beeline from plot point to plot point like some fucking psychopath, there's still not enough cutscenes. The biggest offender comes right after you beat Bergen and the party decides to go to Arcades. This is a massive trek, and the most likely route takes you through 5 playable areas: Mosferan High Waste, the Salika Wood, Fawn Coast, Sita Uplands, and Sochin Cave Palace. Side note, how do you pronounce this? Mosferan? Mosferan? Mosforan? I really don't know, I'm throwing a dart blindfolded here. Across this sizable portion of the game world, there's a grand total of three cutscenes with dialogue of any kind. 2 of them are irrelevant. Granted, the remaining one is among the best in the whole game, but it's still only a few minutes surrounded by hours of gameplay and nothing else. FF10 could never leave you alone like this, can you imagine? At some points it has the opposite problem. Like it's afraid if you don't get some narrative development right now, you'll forget who all these characters are, which hurts real bad when you realize they didn't think to include a skip button. Sometimes you're begging for a chance to play the game again, but the cutscenes are generally well distributed, allowing for a smoothly paced story. There's always something interesting going down. Even if it doesn't pertain to the pilgrimage per se, it at least develops some interpersonal dynamics, and that's something I hugely appreciate too. The gang is allowed to just do shit sometimes. The game feels like a road trip like no other game has felt to me. We take boat rides, we stop and talk on the road, we have beautiful moments of peace. Not only does it let the characters grow naturally, but in FF10's case it strengthens one of its core themes, that being deception. Spira is a world full of lies, on the macro and micro scale. Of course, lie number 1 is the final summoning, a lie so embedded in Spira's culture that the cycle of false hope could only ever be broken by an outsider.
Sin is the punishment for, and the incarnation of crimes we have committed.
So no one really knows what it is.
There's no need to know, so no one asks. You run or you fight. That is really all you can do. There's no sense brooding over it.
What, that's all? I mean, you don't even wonder?
You really do come from a world where there is no sin, like you say.
But while we gradually peel back the hypocrisy of Yevon, there's a miniature version of this happening in the party. I find it fascinating how FF10 crafted a party who actively keep secrets from each other so much without making them seem like dime a dozen backstabbing scumbags. They're not motivated by personal gain. Sometimes it's a party cohesion thing, like keeping Riku and Yuna's ethnicity secret from Grand Wizard Wako over there so he doesn't start building a wall. But most of the time it's just that Spira is kind of a fucked up place, man. It's often easier to protect people from some ugly truths. Auron has been through all this before. He knows one of the Guardians is doomed to become the final Aeon, and eventually the next incarnation of Sin, but he doesn't say anything because Yuna is determined to finish her pilgrimage no matter what, no matter how much she suffers. So it's on a need-to-know basis. But he and Titus are also sharing the secret that Sin is Jekt, something he did tell Titus to prevent him from becoming emotional at a critical time. One of the biggest head-scratchers about this game is that Auron is seemingly a hypocrite. If he tells Titus about Jekt to let him process it over time, why do the exact opposite with respect to the final Aeon? It's a head-scratcher, right? But I do think it makes sense from a certain point of view. My take on this is that unlike Titus's case, it's good for the party to get emotional at the right time, because that's what ultimately happens, right? It's devastating news. Yunalesca brings a shocking ultimatum, and in their horror, the party rebels. They strike down Yunalesca and forge their own path. That's exactly what Auron wanted, right? To break the cycle that held Spira hostage for 1,000 years? Would the party have acted so recklessly if Auron gave them time to think about it on the way? I mean, whichever way you slice it, it's still incredibly convoluted and an obvious play for drama, but welcome to FF10, baby. I'm fond of this take because Auron is canonically very secretive, but this gives him a downright dastardly side that people don't really associate with him. Your mileage may vary though. He's not the only one. Yuna refuses to give her true reason for deciding to marry Seymour. Confronting him for his crimes is like confronting Yevon itself, and she's willing to risk her own livelihood but not her guardians. She knows they would gladly jump into the fire with her, like it's their job or something, but doesn't want to let them make that choice. Summoners as a whole are encouraged to put on a facade of strength at all times, regardless of how they truly feel. And also, Yuna's an idiot, but that's for later. And of course, there's the big one. Titus is optimistic about the future. He goes on and on about what he and Yuna could do after they beat Sin, and no one joins in, but no one has the heart to tell him the truth either.
It's quiet. Kimari goes now.
At the end of her pilgrimage, Yuna is destined to die. She has no future. There was no rational or utilitarian purpose to keep this from him. It's just when he starts to piece it together, no one can even look him in the eye. Titus's breakdown in this moment is a beautiful, gut-wrenching scene that recontextualizes many interactions throughout the game. He's angry at them for stringing him along because they didn't have the guts to tell him. He's embarrassed for saying all those hopeful, impossible things. And he's grieving. The grim knowledge that Yuna and the other Guardians had been nursing this whole time is hitting him like a truck. But even after all that, Titus is no better than the rest of them. Later, Titus learns that his life is tied to Sin. Not just him, but Jecht and the entirety of the Zanarkand he knows. If Sin is killed, really killed, the dream will end. And Titus doesn't have the guts to say it. Even when Yuna calls him out for hiding something, he keeps it inside, only blurting it out in the final battle. In the biz, we call that a switcheroo. The myth that the final summoning will one day kill Sin permanently didn't survive so long because Yevon did a good job of protecting it, because they actually did a really bad one if we're honest. It survived because false hope is a dangerously pleasant thing. Much more pleasant than reality. Even if you know this and resolve to live and fight your sorrow, that fight will take all the strength you have and then some. If FF10's party dynamics weren't so painstakingly spicy, this theme wouldn't shine like it does. In contrast, FF12 is pretty low in inter-party conflict, and most of it is at the beginning of the game when there's still not a proper party yet. The spice level is acceptable. After all, Vaughn did lie through his teeth to Penelo, and it's genuinely upsetting when the Palace Gang gets caught and Penelo screams at him for betraying your trust. The first thing Balthier and Fran wanted to do was rob Vaughn blind. Vaughn is torn between nerding out about meeting real-life sky pirates and being mad that they tried to do piracy on him. In Barheim Passage, things get more personal. For the first time, Vaughn is looking his brother's alleged murderer in the face, and probably would have killed Bosch right there if the circumstances weren't so dire. It's a genuinely delightful cocktail of character development. I love a good band of misfits. This alliance of necessity makes Vaughn struggle against his emotional impulses and learn some self-preservation instincts. It reveals Balthier's good heart concealed under the suave sky pirate persona. It forces Bosch to gaze upon the results of his failure for the first time. He may not have twisted the blade in Rex's gut, but if he had been a little faster, Rex and the King may be alive today. Fran is happy to be there. Hi, Fran. It's pretty easy to pinpoint where the party becomes fully realized. Our second escape from the Leviathan after it gets destroyed by the Dawn Shard. Having seen what it can do, Ash has a clear path to regaining her kingdom, and Bosch is committed to helping her. Balthier and Fran are once again paid to help out, but this time in sentimental value rather than material. For real though, Balthier asking for that wedding ring is a baller scene. More on that later. Vaughn and Penelo, they're happy to be there. And then, dear viewer, these 6 characters are just kinda cool with each other the entire game. Except here.
How old were you again?
Nice fun.
Surprisingly rude.
Right, I'll tell you what, you fat little cunt.
The character cocktail sits there, half-finished, collecting dust because the bartender has fallen asleep on the job. Ash has her whole dilemma about fighting the Empire and using Nethicite, and yeah, some characters have opinions about this, but that's not conflict. Everyone is kinda nudging her in the direction of peace, but in the end, Ash's struggle is mostly internal. Unlike FF10, the moral question at the center of the story doesn't divide the party, and there aren't any smaller ideological divides like the Albed to distinguish the characters either. So in the latter 2/3 of the game, this group is just not memorable at all. When discussing conflict in FF12, you can basically treat the party as one character in a complex political web. While Ash is on her MacGuffin quest, there are several powerful players advancing their own agendas. Some of them are arguably just as important to Ash's goals as Ash herself. FF10's world is quite static in comparison. Usually when an NPC does something important, it's in response to the party's presence, directly or not. I guess this is somewhat justified thematically, as Spira is stuck in its ways and Titus is supposed to be the wrench in the machine.
The precepts must be obeyed.
Like I care.
But regardless of the reason, the world feels less alive because of it. It's no wonder the narrator for 10 is the main character, but the narrator for 12 is an important side character. That's basically a perfect summation of these two games' different priorities, right? 12 has a certain realism. The antagonistic characters truly feel human. Yeah, they're often violent and manipulative, but you can see the logical through line behind why they are this way. No one looks at, say, Micah or Seymour and thinks, oh, they actually have a point. No, it's pretty simple. They're propping up a fraudulent and evil system. They're the bad guys. Even their fucking theme songs agree. But while Ash and friends resist the ever-growing influence of the Empire, Vayne, Cid, and Vana are mounting a resistance of their own. They're fighting for mankind's freedom to decide its own destiny. If they weren't such horrible bastard men, that could be the heroic quest propping up a Final Fantasy game by itself, especially since, in the end, Ash opposes the Ikuria too. FF12 has an uncommon kind of ending. Even if they're all dead, the bad guys still won. They completed their main objective, and it's not a downer ending. Things basically go about as well as you would hope. FF12's political intrigue is so twisty and turny because it reflects the real world. Sometimes, bitter opponents find something they agree on. Other times, alliances break apart. Not due to a change of heart, the end goal is the same, but irreconcilable methods. And hell, sometimes you partner up with someone because there is no other option. 10 has a mere sprinkle of this. Like, everyone hates Sin, Yevonites and Albed. However, the Albed disagree with ritualistic human sacrifice, even for the perceived greater good. That does put them at odds with Yevon, but the moral ambiguity's a little dampened because of how cartoonishly evil Yevon can be.
Kill them.
That's not necessarily a sin, it's all about choosing your priorities. FF10 doesn't want to be subtle or realistic. It wants to be a powerful, emotional, character-driven story. And that's a great kind of story to be if the goal is to stick around in popular culture, by the way. The world of Spira is optimized for enhancing the drama within the main cast, not for, making sense. It's like a little ant. Don't put it under a magnifying glass, cause bad things will happen to it. I mean, where do I start? Dream Zanarkand is kind of a simulation of the real Zanarkand right before it was destroyed 1,000 years ago. There's no time travel in this plot whatsoever. Dream Zanarkand occupies a real, corporeal, physical space in Spira. It's just out in the ocean, really, really far away. You'll never find it exploring by sea, but it's not far enough to stop Jecht from getting lost and washing up in Bevel. There's no mention of you Yevon turning the simulation off and on again if things get dicey, but the Dream Zanarkand of today looks no different to when it was first created, 1,000 years ago. How? I'm really not trying to be cynical. It's fine to leave elements of world building up to discussion, but this is absurd. Do people on Dream Zanarkand assume they're the only people in the world? Have they tried exploring what's out there? I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. Like, aren't they worried about overpopulation at some point? Given how built up the place is, it's obviously a bustling city. People are living in comfort. There's no threats to speak of. Many generations of Dream people have existed in Dream Zanarkand, and somehow no one's had the idea to expand? The Dream people aren't physically different to real people in some way as far as reproduction and lifespan goes. They're not one-to-one copies of the real people of Zanarkand from back then, since they don't know about Bevel, let alone the war with Bevel. But there's no brain fungus that makes them naturally uncurious or subservient either, since Titus and Jecht exist.
Like I care.
Maybe it's based off modern Japan where birth rates are well below replacement rate? I guess Dream Zanarkand never had a Shinzo Abe type to make anime about the wonders of making babies. Let's not forget, technology hasn't advanced at all in 1,000 years. At least real Spira has the excuse of being under Yevon's thumb, but what's the deal here? If you're dangerously close to curing cancer or inventing long-range radar in Dream Zanarkand, do you get Jeffrey Epsteined by a sin-spawn version of the CIA? But enough about Dream Zanarkand. Other people have gone into depth about the ridiculousness of this stuff, but there's plenty to talk about, like how Sin destroys settlements that get too big and over-reliant on technology, except for Luca, Bevel, and arguably the Albed home. Maybe it doesn't know where the last one is, so I'll ignore that one. The in-universe explanation, for Luca at least, is literally that they try really hard to protect it from Sin, as the Blitzball Stadium is the only source of joy Spirans have. You know what else is important? Not having people live in fear of the massive whale monster. Square Enix really tried to have their cake and eat it too here. Sin is an indestructible force of nature, and we empirically see that when Operation Mihen fails to damage it. But at the same time, if they try really hard, they can keep Sin away. The million-dollar question is this. If you can protect Luca and Bevel, why are there still people living outside Luca and Bevel? Between Besaid, Kilika, Guadasalam, and Gagazet, there really aren't that many people to relocate. There's like 20 people in Besaid, tops. I get that FF10 needs a place like Luca so that Blitzball can exist in Spira, but it creates problems nevertheless. But I'm not done. I have issues with the whole nature of the pilgrimage and the final summoning. How is it not common knowledge that you need to sacrifice one of your guardians to make the final Aeon? Did none of the returning guardians, like Auron, think to mention it? Sure, maybe Auron was the first time anyone returned from a completed pilgrimage. Since Unalesca, there were only 4 summoners who killed Sin with the final Aeon, which in itself is a ludicrously low number for 1,000 years of people desperately trying. Yeah, it's possible Braska was the first High Summoner to have more than one Guardian, but I'm having a hard time believing this. Yevon doesn't impose an official limit on Guardians, they just have to be people you have a bond with. There's nothing stopping a Summoner from bringing as many people as they can trust. Wait a minute.
I only have as many Guardians as there are people I can trust.
Is it more of a soft, social rule then? If so, the majority doesn't uphold it. Out of the recent summoners we see in FF10, we have Isaru, Zook, Braska, and Yuna who have multiple guardians. Meanwhile, Dana, Seymour, and Lady Ginham have one. We don't know about Belgamine, but even if she only took one guardian, that's still a 50-50 split. Taking multiple guardians seems pretty normal to me. It seems stupid not to do that, and even more stupid that the idiots who didn't do that are the ones who usually make it all the way to Unalesca. And we know that Unalesca doesn't dispose of leftover guardians after the final summoning. She let Auron leave Zanarkand in the first place. She only killed him when he came back to avenge his friends. Speaking of Unalesca, is she stupid? What is the actual reason for admitting that this final summoning will never vanquish Sin permanently, right before the summoner is about to do it? Couldn't she just lie, like Yevon is accustomed to doing since forever? About this exact topic? The game has a reoccurring problem with letting characters hold the idiot ball, like how Titus takes an embarrassingly long time to piece things together about Yuna, or how Auron refuses to go into the ghost place, then suddenly collapses when Yuna does the ghost banishment dance, and everyone's like, oh, what was that about? Anyway, people give FF12 guff for being hard to follow, but 10 has a lot more convoluted bullshit holding everything together, and yet a lot of people find it endearing more than annoying. And I don't think many people would say it's confusing either. The story beats and conflicts are simple and well defined, even if the stuff under the hood is often questionable. Everyone has a certain tolerance for bullshit in fiction, you know? If the payoff for suspending your disbelief is compelling enough, you can be forgiving. For most of us, FF10 fell on the good side of that threshold, and the reason is because it's a very earnest game. Here's a question for the comments. What's your favorite inexplicable goofy FF10 moment? Mine is this stupid jog Titus does for no reason. The transition to PS2 was a bumpy ride, and there are countless moments that stick out as clumsy. Not just in the writing, but the presentation. And the voice acting.
But I wanted to see it. With Yuna by my side.
But when these weaknesses combine with the sheer heartfelt emotion oozing from this game's every pore, something truly special forms. It's a game you don't take 100% or even 50% seriously, but it can still make you bawl your eyes out. It's too rough-hewn to be truly immersive. You never forget you're playing an early 2000s video game, but it's easy to imagine the developers as your drunken friend. He stutters a lot, and much of what he's saying contradicts itself, but you're pulled along by his conviction regardless. FF12 is like if you caught up with that friend the next morning. He's more lucid, he's not throwing up everywhere, but he's also quieter and more restrained. But I want to address the myth that FF12's plot is hard to follow. I don't deny that people get confused playing it, but it has to do with everything except the events of the story. The presentation is theatrical. It genuinely takes me back to my school years of reading Shakespeare. The perspective jumps between self-contained scenes that don't always involve the protagonists. And people don't just say what they mean, that's too easy. The dialogue is layered with subtext that is a genuine delight to unpack. That actually does wonders for the game and helps distinguish it, but if you're used to traditional linear RPG storytelling, it can throw you off. And good luck to you if you don't know English very well.
Eternal. We are history's stewards. I like your funny words, Magic Man.
This is where the lack of writing in the main story rears its ugly head. Shakespeare never had the main characters go off and fight giant chickens for 10 hours between every important scene. He had the sense to skip that part. If you have a few spare hours, I recommend just marathoning the cutscenes on YouTube sometime. The plot is a lot more coherent that way. This game really could have benefited from a cutscene replay feature like something from, I don't know, FF10? Like, come on guys, surely there was room for a theater in Bujerba or Arcades. Before my next big ramble, I'd be remiss to not discuss how these games end. I won't go blow by blow like for the first impressions, but I do think this is just as important to cover. Unfortunately, FF12 kinda biffs the landing here. If you want to point fingers at why this game lost the popularity contest, this is a pretty big clue. It's just outclassed in both the beginning and the end. The opening wasn't bad at all, but alas, 10 really came out swinging and delivered a masterclass. 12's ending, though, is a different story. But honestly, the plot kinda gives up in the latter half of the game altogether. None of these chuckle fucks talk to each other, and the delicate political games have been taking a backseat to familiar territory. MacGuffins, empires, and gods. The ending tries to breathe some life back in, but it's too little too late, and not executed as well as FF10's ending. Now this is an ending. We get a subdued but very touching reunion between Tidus and Jecht, complete with a cathartic boss fight. Well, it's cathartic as long as you don't lose, because yeah, this cutscene is great, but after being forced to see it a few times you start wishing Jecht really did drown at sea. Anyway, after that we say goodbye to Jecht and our Aeons, then we execute Yevon and sink into a crying mess for the entire final FMV. It's lovely, I recommend it. So FF12's ending, right, it has a problem. There's too much ending, or rather, it starts ending too soon. I'm perfectly okay with defining FF10's ending as everything after the point of no return, but I can't really do that for FF12. The events on top of the Pharos are just too important. We finally meet Bosch's brother Gabrand, the man who killed Rex, and also the king of Dalmasca, face to face. We rematch against Cid, and Balthier says goodbye to his dad. It's an interesting parallel, you know? Both games have a father and son fight each other, but 12 just doesn't do much with it. Tidus and Jecht are inextricably linked as characters, but Balthier and Cid are only seen interacting when they fight in-game. Yeah, Balthier's daddy issues are what put him on this path, but said issues are just not explored deeply enough. The most important part of the Pharos events is, of course, Ashe winning the battle with herself. This is one of the game's best sequences. It's delightfully intense. I just wish there was more game after this. Wait, guys, I was joking. Yeah, Vayne is still around. We gotta go deal with him, I guess. We need to get onto the Sky Fortress Bahamut, the point of no return for FF12. Or more likely, we can go do the last round of side content we just unlocked. Rabanastre can wait, right? It's weird that the main dilemma of the game is resolved, the character arcs are mostly dealt with, and you still have so much game to play. It's weird. It should not have happened. And it's all Vayne's fault for not showing up. He basically missed the bus to the game's conclusion, so now Ashe has to put her big boots on and drive him there herself. The actual final sequence is okay. The Bahamut, like the structure we're inside, is a giant asshole. You would think this super weapon flagship powered by mist would get some kind of mention beforehand, but not so. Like, before the huge mist explosion, where were they storing this chonker? To me, this monstrosity is a sign that Square kinda knew they wrote themselves into a hopeless situation. The Pharos is the climax, and this is the cleanup. But the game needs to end with something big and consequential. So what do? Big fucking mothership that shoots lasers. All that aside, the final confrontation with Vayne is pretty good. Larsa and Gabranth really shine the brightest here, and having them join you in Phase 1 and 2 respectively is an awesome moment for both. Vayne, though, I'm a bit mixed on. His success came from his ability to manipulate people and execute subterfuge, so isn't it a bit strange to end his story with magical roid rage?
This is my vegetarian body!
On one hand, at least it is a boss fight, not a pathetic little creature like Yevon. FF10 has this weird quality where there are secondary antagonists, but it doesn't feel like there's a primary antagonist. Yevon lost any semblance of humanity long ago. He's an empty shell, just like the religion he named. So it makes some narrative sense that you can't lose this fight unless you try super hard. After all, Yevon is nothing without his cloak of lies. And of course, the ideological battles are wrapped up with at this point since this thing is mindless. There's a much more practical reason to fight is like this, the last time you ever save is before the Jekt boss fight. And if the Jekt boss fight was annoying because of the unskippable cutscene beforehand, imagine having to go through all that, beat Jekt again, and also watch the cutscene after that before getting another crack at Yevon. Yeah, there would be war, but I digress. There's a vital difference between this and FF12's case. The fight isn't very interesting, but we can't just not kill this thing. It is what we came here to do after all. Yevon is a one and done, quick cleanup fight riding off the momentum of the real final boss, not an entire dungeon. It doesn't cuck Jekt out of his epic conclusion. In contrast, Vane's fight goes all out. It's a final boss fight so familiar that it brings nostalgia to even first-time players. Multiple phases, epic transformation sequence, the works. It's a good effort. I'm a big fan of the genuine brotherhood between him and Vana till the very end. But why did they have to put it here? Why not the Pharaohs? I'll say this, at least when the fighting's over, both of these games do a great job bringing it home. Auron has the coolest goodbye in gaming history and finally gets some well-deserved rest, or so we thought. No one expected him to get drafted into Kingdom Hearts 2. Of course, Tidus's farewell is a certified hood classic. Meanwhile, Balthier has a big hero moment, cementing his status as the leading man, and even Ash defrosts a little. One of my unexpected highlights is this guy, Judge Zargaboth, a very minor antagonist who is basically picking his nose when the Arcadians were infighting. But when the sinking Bahamut threatens to crush Rabanastre, this madman gets ready to ram it off course with his own ship. It's very like FF12 to give everyone a piece of humanity, even a fence-riding centrist like Zargaboth. For the very last thing in FF10, Yuna's speech is cool, maybe a little overshadowed by the tearjerker right before. It's a bittersweet moment for a bittersweet game. Hold up, why did they put Seymour in there? He really thought he was on the team. Yuna pulled off a miracle, and now she can live a life she never expected to have, but without the man she grew to love. And I'm sure she'll deal with that in a reasonable manner. The final FMV of 12 is very different. It has a vibe to it that doesn't really match up with the rest of the game, but I actually appreciate it. It has this kind of sappy vocal track playing throughout, which I'm pretty sure is the only track in the game with lyrics. And it just hits different. This ending is bittersweet in a meta kind of way, because I wish the tone was like this more often. This is a very happy ending, all things considered, and everyone is relishing in the peace they've earned. I'm all for little glimpses of characters not in plot mode, for lack of a better word, and this scene makes me feel a certain way the rest of the game didn't. And shout out to the sketches in the credits, some of these are really adorable. They make me weep for the scenes and character moments we never really got. And isn't that the smoothest segue you've ever seen? It's character time, baby. One area where FF12's characters shine is its NPCs. Partially, this may be because NPCs aren't expected to be as developed as main characters, so it's fine if you're a bit more hands-off. But FF12 also just cares about its NPCs a lot more for reasons I already explained. So first of all, let's talk villains. My favorite thing about this trio is that they're genuine friends. You can see it in the difference in Vane's attitude when he's talking to Gabrand versus when Sid walks in.
Now I'm expecting Dr. Sid. You may leave. What news of Arcades? Our honored members of the Senate.
Hard at work, as always, trying to find a dagger for your back.
Sid is multi-talented. He's a scientist and Vane's court jester. He can banter with Vane without fear of reprisal. Now that I think about it, Sid really is the glue of the bunch. They're that specific kind of friendship trio, you know the one. You've got the guy in the middle who brought the group together in the first place. He could hang out with either friend by himself, no problem. That's Sid. Then you have Vane and Vana, who mostly interface with each other through Sid. It would be weird if it was just the two of them hanging out, but when the going gets tough, they are friends at the end of the day, and the ending proves it. Vana is an immortal being. They could have left Vane to die here and looked for another accomplice like he himself suggested, but Vana said, hell nah, I'm ride or die, literally, and the final fight of the game is a fusion of them both. The power of friendship is on the villain's side way more than the heroes, arguably, and I love that shit. Friendship among villains is one of my favorite tropes. It's almost a cheat code to humanizing your bad guys, and it works so well for this story because it enriches the gray morality that's been cultivated all game. game. But what are they like individually? I'll start with Vana since they have the least going on, which is crazy because Vana is the instigator of the entire plot, as in the story, but also the literal plot to overthrow the Acuria. If not for them, Dalmasca would still be independent, Nebradia would still, be, Rex would be chillin' with Vaughn, you get the picture. They're an ascended plot device, a plot ignition key if you will. Vana, the character, is pretty bare bones. I get it though, it's justified for an immortal alien deity that looks like this. They have a defined role in the story and play it to the letter. Thanks Vana. Vane fits comfortably into the magnificent bastard archetype, maybe a little too much so. He's ambitious and charismatic, his schemes are delightfully devilish. He ticks all the boxes, making him a great example of his archetype, but he's a character you've seen many times before. I like him though, he has a certain brutality about him. Of all the people who wake up and choose violence, Vane is the champion. He groggily gets up, dresses himself, checks his phone, and points to himself in the mirror like, "You were gonna fuck up numerous lives today, legend. Oh, and you've done nothing wrong ever." He invades Nebradia and Dalmasca, he kills Ash's dad, he kills his own dad, and when he's given opportunities to resolve the war he started peacefully, he doesn't take them. And the best part is, he completely owns it. It's how he rolls. Vane's final conversation with his dad, the Emperor, is one of the best written moments in the game, perhaps even the series. We have Vane's position to consider. The Senate fears him. Metaphorically speaking, he boot too big for he goddamn feet, and they'd much rather have an emperor they can puppet. His kid brother Larsa, for instance. From Vane's point of view, removing the Senate is the only reasonable option. It's a necessary evil to him. Either he acts now or the Senate take over, leaving Larsa to either get devoured or to end up doing the dirty work himself down the line.
Necessity? Ah yes, necessity. Does that word free you, I wonder? You show no hesitation to solve matters with blood.
The sword of House Solidor cannot be left to rust in doubt. It was you, Excellency, who tempered that sword.
I love this insight we get into Vane's viewpoint. Of course, if Vane wasn't such a naughty boy, the Senate might never have gone this far, but to him, a clash with the Senate was inevitable.
My hands are stained with blood. I see little reason to stay them now.
The deck is stacked against him here. He has no choice but to directly ask his dad to help him dispose of an entire branch of government, as directly as is possible for him anyway. And debatably it works. At least, the Emperor doesn't disagree with Vane's logic. By letting Vane run rampant, he basically signs his own death warrant, but how much of that is intentional? Is he just old and washed up, or does he quietly consent to being sacrificed for the good of his bloodline? It's a shame these cutscenes go by so fast, because if you really dig into the subtleties, it hits in a way none of FF10's cutscenes do. I love that Vane is somehow an underdog here. Even with all his power, he has his own formidable obstacles to outsmart. But he is the villain. He sees himself as the pragmatist who makes difficult choices for the good of mankind, though it's clear by the end that he is a massive control freak. In practice, he doesn't just want to dethrone the Acuria, he wants to take their place. He doesn't tolerate anything that could challenge his authority, so he wants to crush Rosaria and the Resistance rather than cooperating. The coolest thing about Vane is his motivation. When you strip that away, you basically get the Terminator without all the time travel and guns and cool Austrian accent. He's calculating, driven, and remorseless. He's fun to watch for sure, but for the primary antagonist of the game, I wouldn't have minded digging a little deeper into his psyche. And I've already talked about the sheer whiplash of the ending fight, contrasted with what he was like at the beginning of the game. It is a choice. Okay, Sid is a treasure, alright? He enhances every single scene he's in, which is a criminally low number of scenes, by the way. This guy isn't just hammy, he's the whole damn feast. John Rafter Lee put his entire vussy into this role.
A trial for a Shelia Banargin Dalmasca!
You lust for the stone's power, do you not?
He's a source of much-needed levity, especially among the mature villainous characters. My only problem with Sid is a problem many characters in this game have. There wasn't enough of him. I would have loved to see more of his antics, and as I mentioned before, his dynamic with Balthier was severely underutilized. His whole shtick with Vana is, first of all, fun, and also an underrated, brilliant twist. Before, he fit into the amoral mad scientist box, intellectually gifted, but a loose cannon of sorts. He was scary to work with because he was insane, but then we learn he was never insane at all. He's much worse. Everyone loves a crazy villain. We live in a society and all that. The likes of Kafka and Sephiroth are terrifying and entertaining in equal measure because their outlook on the world is so twisted there's no reasoning with them. Sid, on the other hand, is chillingly sane. This point applies to most of the antagonists in the game, really. It's one thing to have a villain with a broken mind, someone who thinks nothing of destruction, but it's something completely different for someone to understand right and wrong perfectly, to comprehend the immense suffering they plan to do, and to have their mind made up and going through with it. He's a little wacky, sure, but no loose screws here. And in a series full of existential horrors and deeply disturbed bad guys, that is so refreshing. Then we have this goofy fuck. Yeah, Seymour is definitely a traditional FF villain, and that's a tragedy because he could have been a lot more. This guy is putrid. He radiates bad guy stink lines, which is the funniest thing about him. Seymour is a figurehead of the most powerful organization in the world, so he's a vain prototype, right? Some kind of master manipulator? Nope. This guy's vibes are rancid right out the gate, both in-universe and out. He commands respect because of his status as a maester, but has no actual charisma. When he proposes to Yuna, you'd think one person would be happy this incredibly powerful holy man noticed her. But no, the best reaction she gets is basically, yeah, as long as you're happy, bro. I don't know how intentional this was, but watching this guy fumble through every social interaction while everyone pretends he's not deeply and obviously disturbed is really fucking funny. That's not even the point I was trying to make. It's not a problem that his villainy is telegraphed early on, but his true colors are disappointing. Let's take a look at Operation Mihan. The Crusaders and Al Bhed plan to lure Sin and kill it with forbidden Machina weaponry. Seymour, as a maester, should be trying to stop this, but it's very much the opposite. This leads to a genuinely fantastic exchange.
Although it may be sacrilege to Yevon, their intentions are pure. And I, Seymour Guado, the person, not the maester of Yevon, as a denizen of Spira, I wish them well in their endeavor.
But using Machina, that's bad, isn't it?
Pretend you didn't see them.
Beg your pardon, but that's not something a maester should say.
Then pretend I didn't say it.
Isn't that so interesting? As slimy as he is, Seymour is a citizen of Spira first, Maester second. It gives Yevon some nuance. Even in the top brass, there are people with the prime objective in sight, defeating Sin. Traditions be damned. Even Titus respects him for it.
From the first time I laid eyes on him, I never did like Seymour. But you know, some of the things he said that day, they made a lot of sense to me.
In a way, Seymour is very Vayne-like in that he aligns with the party. Psych! He never actually believed in Operation Mihan, he just let it happen to kill a bunch of anti-Yevon guys. Also, he killed his dad. Also, he's a complete lunatic whose ultimate goal is to become Sin and kill everything? Man, what happened? It's like FF10 showed that it could write this character well and opted not to. Hey, I love a good character twist, but this is not one of those. And for the record, I'm aware of his horrific upbringing. I understand that he could never have turned out okay after the many traumas of his childhood, but an explanation for his behavior is not the same as a redeeming quality. Honestly, it would have been way cooler if he went through all that and held on to some kind of sanity. He really is the reverse Sid. Here we are, excited for someone evil yet respectable, but by the second half of the game, he's on jobbing duty. He just shows up sometimes to smirk evilly and get defeated over and over. He's not imposing, he's not scary, except for that one boss fight, you know the one. He's not really all that clever, and he's not interesting. At some point, you're just over it, both you and Titus.
Don't you ever give up?
The other maesters are not too different to Seymour in that they are not particularly capable individuals. But here's the thing, the maesters as a unit, they perfectly embody Yevon's philosophy. Yuna's trial is where the maesters go mask off. Any hope of Seymour being punished for his crimes is dashed, as it's much more convenient to cover it up. Oh what, Seymour is already dead? No big deal. Micah has already been dead for quite a while actually. Yevon is a rotting corpse of an institution, kept upon a pedestal by fear and indoctrination. The maesters are very much the same, halfway literally. Their positions of leadership are perpetuated by the same power granted by that leadership. There are no checks and balances. Like Yevon, the maesters cling to their power desperately because in a fair and righteous system, they'd be replaced a long time ago. Maester Kelk is the odd one out here as he shows some integrity. When the beans are spilled about Seymour's escapades, he straight up quits. He's somewhat decent when we meet him later and resembles what Seymour pretended to be.
Lord Kelgranso, if I may. Have you not also turned your back on Bavel?
But still you guard Gagazet as a Ronso, not a maester.
but I'm gonna slot Yunalesca in here to replace him. She has a lot of Maester-like qualities. She's a ghost, she works to carry on the lies of Yevon, and she's also kinda incompetent, as I've mentioned. What's especially great about Yunalesca is that she represents Yevon not just narratively, but mechanically. As you progress through her boss fight, her form becomes more monstrous. You're peeling back layers of deception like a particularly evil onion. She constantly zombifies the party as if to force the philosophy of undeath upon us. This makes any healing damage you instead, so when she casts healing spells on zombified characters, it's just like Yevon's promises of salvation. Beautiful, but twisted. On a surface level, you could say the Judge Magisters are FF12's answer to the Maesters. They're a group of high-ranking antagonists who are only together for one pivotal scene, but they are by no means equivalent. Consider this. Sin and Yu Yevon don't believe in Yevon. They don't believe in much of anything, really. And sure, Jecht is Sin, but not by choice. So by process of elimination, the moral opposition in 10 is left up to these minor antagonists in a trench coat. The Judge Magisters aren't in that kind of situation. Ash's morals get questioned all the time by many different people, and there very much is a primary antagonist in this game. If the Maesters model the corruption of Yevon, a very central theme in FF10, the Judge Magisters model the various reactions to Vayne's violent ascendancy. An important topic for sure, but not nearly as demanding. Bergen is the Ringo Starr of the
reins of history back in the hands of man
club. He's obviously clued into Vayne, Vana, and Sid's plan, but he's more like Vayne's dog than a true part of the team. I would say that's a dick move on Vayne's part, but I'm actually Team Vayne on this one. Bergen is the one true crazy villain in this game. He only respects power, and he's happy to slaughter the Evilese Pope and a bunch of refugees. No one asked him to do that, by the way. He was just here to pick up Larsa. And you know what? I think one guy like this is the perfect number for a story like FF12. His murderous impulses feel out of place, and that's good. It offers a meaningful contrast to the other more complex antagonists. Unlike Seymour, he doesn't overstay his welcome, and actually his performance is really top-notch.
The new Evilese holds no place for the name-down Masker. The stain of Wraithwall's blood shall be washed clean from history's weave.
Zargaboth, as I've mentioned before, does fuck all for most of his screen time. He's caught in the middle between Drace and the president of Vayne's fan club, Bergen. He seems sympathetic to Drace, but he's absolutely not sticking his neck out.
Zargaboth, what of you? Surely you do not believe his brothers were traitors?
No off-topic questions. Because I don't want to. No, permission denied. That's an off-topic questions. Next, you have been stopped.
Out of all the Judge Magisters, he has the least going on. But I like that this character, who was defined by his self-preservation, ends his arc by planning an act of self-sacrifice. So what's the deal with Drace? Oh man, Drace. My beloved. She's the centerpiece of FF12's equivalent of the trial scene. Also, don't you think it's kinda wild that from these two games, FF10 is the one with an actual trial in it? Vayne has just assassinated his dad the Emperor and framed the Senate for it, installing himself as the absolute dictator of Arcadia. It's fishy as all hell, and frankly, no one in the room buys Vayne's story. But the only one who has the gumption to call him out on it is Drace.
Vayne Solidor! As Judge Magister and upholder of the law, I hereby place you under arrest.
Drace's story is tragic. If Gabranth and Zargaboth were brave enough to join in and rock the boat, who knows how this would have ended. It reminds me of that one quote, "The world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything." This is an Einstein quote, a real Einstein quote. Granted, he originally said it in German, but the quote is from him. Yeah, I'm just as stunned as you are, that's like a unicorn. So yeah, Drace really is the calque of this group, she's the best of them by far, and it's for that very reason that she doesn't survive. Bergen hopped up on magic roids overpowers her, and Vayne turns her rebellion into one final act of cruelty. He makes Gabranth finish the job, reaffirm his loyalty. Execute Drace. Even in her last moment before dying on the floor, she is still the most dignified person in the room.
Pray be quick.
Now that is the death of a champion. What a sequence, huh? Yuna's trial is more consequential, strictly speaking, but I could not imagine FF12 without this scene. Everyone say, "Thank you, Drace." Thank you, Drace. I love it. The dialogue is on point, the drama is juicy, it's 12 at its finest. The Judge Magisters depict corruption from a very different angle to the Maesters. They're not living a lie. All of these guys are genuinely loyal to Arcadia in their own ways, and they were able to coexist until hitting this crossroads. Vayne's bold authoritarian takeover makes him the Julius Caesar of Final Fantasy. First of the Empire, last of the Republicans. There are different responses to this kind of thing. There's the Draces, who have too much integrity to accept this and put up a fight. There's the Bergens, who are comfortable with with it and position themselves as enforcers for the new regime. And there are the Zargaboths who don't have enough conviction to take a side. That puts them on the new dictator's team by default. Gabranth warrants his own section. He's a little more complicated, and he has Larsa to worry about too. All these guys have a purpose of some kind, which is more than I can say for the Maesters. Seymour is obviously a big player, Kelk is the black sheep, but Keenock? Really? You needed this guy here instead of having 3 Maesters? And I'm iffy about Micah too. He's only important because he's the leader of Spira, but his personality is bland. Again, it comes down to the writing of these games. FF10 is very much us versus them. It's the party's job to challenge the morals of Yevon, so you can get away with making the Maesters a little samey. Regardless of the reason though, they are samey. Okay, it's Gabranth time. Gabranth. I go back and forth on whether I like him or not, and here's my final conclusion. It depends. He's got a lot going on, arguably more than anyone I've discussed so far, even Vayne. Gabranth is a man who has lost everything. His homeland, his brother, and ultimately his agency. The guy has a menacing aura about him, especially early on, but as time goes on we learn how downtrodden he really is. He got his life's mission to protect Larsa from the Emperor in the first place, and he takes it seriously even after Vayne takes over. He's forced to remain stoic and swallow his pride so that he can continue his mission under Vayne's watchful eye. Then the party meets him on top of the Pharaohs and he goes fucking bonkers. The first time I saw this, I was gobsmacked. Like, what's wrong, dude? Is the banter by the Judge Magister water cooler just not hitting the same now that it's just him and Zargaboth over there? I'd probably go crazy too. Seriously though, this moment is great but frustrating. It's great because Gabranth is an interesting dude, and this is where he really shows it. It's frustrating because the whiplash of this moment was completely avoidable. The perfect word to describe Gabranth didn't exist until long after the release of the game. Underneath his facade, Gabranth is a doomer. The longer he served in Arcadia's military, the more his life slipped out of his control. Deep down, that gnaws at him, but he sincerely believes there is no way out. He's firmly stuck in the past. So of course he goads Ash into making more nethicite. Of course he screams at her to get revenge. He believes that everyone thinks like him. So when Ash lets go of the past, of course he flips out, because Ash has just proven there is another way. She is proof that Gabranth wasted his life. My issue is, there is no way to connect these dots before the pivotal scene. Hell, you'd be forgiven for missing the dots altogether. Prior to this explosive outburst, Gabranth seemed pretty stable. You can make a calm character suddenly flip out. It can work, but this is such a lazy way to do it. Don't just dump all this new character stuff at the 11th hour in such an already busy scene. You need some fucking foreplay, man. There's some fascinating ideas here, which makes the execution hurt even more. Seeing this play out just makes you go, huh? Did I miss something? They needed to throw in some foreshadowing about Gabranth's true feelings. After hitting rock bottom, he does claw back some agency and redeem himself somewhat. I like this part, it's cool, but it doesn't magically make Gabranth make sense. His arc with Larsa ends in a weird spot too, since they never really have a proper conversation. He is a serious waste of potential, maybe the biggest victim of FF12's chronic neglect of its characters overall. In FF10, there is a character who is basically the exact opposite. You better be strapped in, cause I get to talk about my favorite NPC in this game now.
I'm the best.
Jecht hits the sweet spot. He's not overly streamlined like some other NPCs, but unlike Gabranth, his arc is actually straightforward. Blitzball Superstar gets plucked away from a life of boats and hoes, and throughout his pilgrimage with Braska, he matures as a person. He gains some awareness of the shortcomings of his ego and how that affected the people around him. For the first time, he fights for a cause greater than himself and becomes a true hero. The guy's pretty transparent, there's not much to dissect here, and yet, he's irreplaceable. Why? It's the way his development and presence is naturally sprinkled throughout the story. He's first defined by what he is rather than who he is. He is a sporting legend. He is Titus's father, and he is a daddy that brings issues. Maybe I should rephrase that one. His memory haunts Titus even after 10 years without him.
Jecht loved you.
Oh, come on, please.
Titus is faced with more and more evidence that his childhood view of Jecht is only one flawed view of the person that Jecht was. We reconstruct our image of Jecht alongside Titus, and by the time we properly meet him, you don't feel confused watching this reunion scene. The moment is properly earned. Earlier, I described this scene as subdued. There just isn't much dialogue. Half of it is shooting the shit about the task that lies ahead, where you'd expect an immediate explosion of feelings built up over 10 years. The conversation is awkward and stilted. And it's perfect. This is the only way this scene could feel genuine. There's a certain machismo to this whole exchange that you'll know very well if you're a man or just talk to men. Verbalizing our emotions is about as pleasant as kicking an Albed cannon.
Curses. Ow!
On a societal level, we've worked hard to correct this. Men are improving in this regard, but it's still relatable, and it was certainly relatable 22 years ago.
Dad?
Yeah.
I hate you.
I really appreciate how their dynamic is handled. Titus's relationship with his father doesn't end with forgiveness, but with understanding. Jecht genuinely mistreated him. It doesn't matter if his head got on his ass by way of incompetence or malice. It doesn't matter that Jecht always loved his son. He still did what he did. And the story doesn't treat Titus as immature for holding on to some anger for it. Yes, they can see eye to eye, and yes, they can work together, but Jecht's actions are not forgotten. The mature and down-to-earth approach of this arc stands out to me, especially in a fantastical and endlessly dramatic story like FF10. FF12's Larsa, on the other hand, has a strong arc and a pretty grounded story. He's very efficiently written. Like Jecht, there's no bullshit around his development. He would be my favorite NPC in this game if Sid didn't exist, because, you know, he's Sid. Enough said. But Larsa is not far behind. There's a lot of surprising things about him, like, what do you mean he's 12? And what do you mean that's a guy? But it's true. He fits into the party like a glove. I wish they found a way to make him a permanent member. The party's struggles offer perspective he lacked in his sheltered life. In return, he represents the goodness still left in the Empire, and to Ash, he is a wake-up call. If she chooses war, it won't just be the Vanes and Gabrants of the world who suffer, but the Vaughns, Penellos, and the Larsas.
There is hope.
Right?
Don't encourage
Hope for a future where we can join hands as brothers.
His intentions are noble, he fully believes in a peaceful resolution, but having grown up in the capital, he needs to be weaned off the Imperial Kool-Aid. He struggles to reconcile his image of the nation that raised him with the suffering that it has caused to other people, but he doesn't collapse on himself. Lars is another character who could carry an entire FF game if he had the screen time. As it stands, the themes he brings to the table, like unlearning colonial propaganda and seeing the people you love in a new light as you lose your childhood innocence, are a great aspect of this story, and he could do a lot with it. I'd love to see him as a viewpoint character in some spin-off, cause this kid has lived through it. When I was his age, my biggest concern was not being able to run Minecraft on my shitbox family PC. He's able to look his brother in the face, someone he looked up to all his life and the ultimate representative of Arcadia.
No, brother. I will not. Though I lack your power, I will still persist.
And draw his sword. By the end of the game, he is Emperor. Not to get too political, but Larsa is my idea of a true patriot. He's able to look the ugly truth in the face and drag his country into a better future. Larsa has one of the most complete character arcs in the game. I wouldn't say he's as emotionally compelling as Jecht, but he is well made. Whoops, I've just described these games to a T, spoiler alert. That's the major NPCs out of the way. I appreciate that this was a very 12-heavy segment, but I'm working with what I got here. Both implementations serve their story quite well, and as it turns out, 12's impersonal storytelling is much more conducive to an active, well-rounded supporting cast. FF10 has a tendency to use minor characters to flesh out its world from the ground up. There are many voiced NPCs who are there to represent or display an aspect of Spira's culture. 12 doesn't have this because they don't need it. They have something else filling in that duty. Apart from the handful of people from Rabanastre Von knew growing up, 12's voiced NPCs come in two flavors, nobles and soldiery. Oh, sorry, I forgot about, slapstick villains. Now consider FF10. Luzu and Gata are clearly just there to embody the Crusaders and deliver that aspect of the world to both Titus and the player. But I will say they do have some great moments in their own right. People don't give Luzu enough credit specifically. Right before Operation Mihen, he has one of the most underrated scenes in the game. He admits that it was him who recruited Wakka's brother Chappu to the Crusaders, making his death kinda Luzu's fault. Of course, Wakka doesn't take this well. And Luzu obviously feels guilty enough about it to spit it out, but it's clear that if he had the opportunity to make that choice again, he would.
Chappu also said to me that being with your girl is good, but keeping sin far away from her is better.
Luzu and Gata introduced us to the lore and function of the Crusaders in the first place, but this scene right here, this is what truly teaches us what their cause means to them and how important their mission is to Spira. And just as an aside, I absolutely love this exchange.
Luzu, don't die out there.
So you can hit me more?
Lots more.
I don't know if this was at all intentional, but it reminds me of what Titus's mom tells him about Jecht.
Do you hate him so? But if he dies, you'll never be able to tell him how much you hate him.
With how often the concepts of life and death get discussed in this game and like a bajillion others, they can become abstracted. As gamers, we comprehend the words, right? But the emotional punch is kinda diluted. These two quotes bring me back to earth. They remind me of what it actually means for a life to be lost. Whatever you were planning to do, you will never do. Whatever relationships you had with the people you leave behind, that's how they stay. This is a bit muddled by the way Spira's afterlife works, but that doesn't diminish the power of these quotes for me. By the way, that's one of like 8 lines Titus's mom says, so pound for pound, she's probably got the rawest dialogue in the game. Right behind this kid, of course. Anyway, getting back on track. Luzu, Gata, the Chocobo Knights, they're ultimately just dudes. They speak for a large institution, but their individual actions are tangentially important to the plot at best. Think back to the intro of FF12 and compare them to the hard-ass from Rex's mission, Vossler, who's been coordinating the Dalmascan resistance ever since. On the totem pole of voiced FF12 NPCs, he's pretty low in status, but he's a leader to his men. His decisions affect the party greatly, and the events of FF12 would go differently if he were absent. Vossler is so tragic. Unlike Bosch, he escaped the shit show in Albina. In some ways, this is a curse. I don't mean to knock Bosch. His 2 years in captivity weren't exactly a sabbatical in the evil East Bahamas. But one thing he avoided was the burden of responsibility. Vossler had a resistance to run. Every single day for 2 years, he was in a hopeless situation, outmatched by the military juggernaut called Arcadia, slinking around in the shadows, unable to trust anyone. Would Bosch have been able to withstand this pressure? His decision to betray the party is one of those FF12 moments that fall into place so neatly.
Who are you, Vossler, to talk of trust?
A son of Dalmasca.
Like I said earlier, there are many ways to achieve the same outcome. Unfortunately, the Doomer Club has claimed another victim, together with Gabranth and I guess all of Yevon too, now that I think about it. Vossler wants Dalmasca back maybe more than anyone else, but from his exhausted and paranoid point of view, the only way to get that is by cutting a deal with the Empire. Vossler's character arc is very underrated. I feel more connected to a strong person falling from grace not because of some dramatic revelation, but by succumbing to their grim circumstances and losing that battle of attrition. On top of that, I'm also a sadist. On top of that, I love it here specifically because it makes the world and political turmoil feel much more uncertain and dangerous. For his limited time in the story, Vossler has a crazy amount of impact and I miss him. I miss Vossler. I know he had to go, but damn it, he was so interesting. Now I'm gonna pivot to this guy, Machen, the fucking champion of lore dump NPCs, cause that's all he does. It's silly how he inexplicably crosses paths with the party on various occasions. Now he's not the only offender. There's Belgamine, there's Owaka, but they got plans. Macon's purpose is as transparent as can be. Know stuff and be ready to tell it to the party. That's it, that's all I got. It's almost endearing. FF12 has no equivalent because if you want lore, you can read about it or ask the locals. You know, the logical way to do it.
And that, as they say, is that.
Who am I even supposed to parallel this guy with? Marquis Ondor? I guess they spout exposition from time to time? Nah. For one, Ondor is reading from a memoir. He's not stalking the party to info dump about the cool lightning towers. Ondor actually does stuff. He's somewhat of an underrated MVP, which is a funny way to describe the leader of the resistance. It reinforces the scale and complexity of the world. You know, everyone has their own part to play. He balances on an extremely thin political tightrope, maintaining friendly relations with the Empire while coordinating resistance troops. He has some clutch moments like handing over the party to the Empire, which keeps him in their good books, and lets them bail out Ash. His genuine cleverness and silver tongue make him a joy to watch whenever he's on screen.
You wear your saddle well.
Be that as it may, I have no intention of being bridled, Your Honor.
Then you prefer the whip?
I'm gonna speedrun the rest of these people. Geese is also a Judge Magister, but hand on my heart, I genuinely forgot about him on the first pass of the script. He's gone pretty quick. He has the least effective coup attempt of all time. He takes himself out, neutralizes one of Ash's greatest weapons, and the aftershocks get Vayne into power faster. Al Cid is a lot like the Rosaria he comes from. Probably super interesting, but we'll never know. The exaggerated suaveness of this guy is pretty cute, and I think he's meant to be seen as really cool, but he's just not there enough to make a lasting impression. Wait a minute. FF12. How come your developer lets you get 2 SIDs? The FF10 SID is... let's see, who else? Shalinda is obviously there to represent the views of the common Yevonite. Donna is obviously there to serve major looks. I always found her boy toy Barthelo and his deep respect for Orin adorable. Truth be told, I have a soft spot for Donna. I'm glad that in this tragic world of hopeful good guys and sinister villains...
My. And all these people are your guardians? My, what a rabble.
There's people like Donna who are just garden variety mean, just by nature for no grander purpose. The Luca goers are also in this camp, and it's an interesting choice to introduce all these mean characters in the same temple. Without her, we'd be thinking all summoners are either rays of sunshine or insane. But even if she's usually a bitch, Donna is as much of a summoner as the rest. Redis is a pirate king. If I actually watched One Piece, I'd make some kind of joke or reference. At least I think there's a pirate king in One Piece. I hope there is. Somewhere in here. Honestly, Redis is badass. If he appeared a little earlier in the story, he'd probably be universally beloved. This man has banger quotes for days.
Would you like to know the best use of nethicite? Will or nil, I'll tell you. You pick it up and throw it away.
As the only person in Ivalice who's truly seen the full extent of how much destruction nethicite can bring, he's an important influence on Ash while she debates what to do with nethicite.
I, Judge Magister, condemn you to oblivion!
There are stars and there are stinkers, but the NPCs in these games serve their purpose quite well. It just so happens that FF12's NPCs have grander purposes as a whole. The fact that they have active roles in the story makes them feel much more like people. The one NPC in 10 who really feels like a fleshed out person is Jecht. Not that the others don't have charm, but they really just feel like mascots for their respective cause, or they don't make enough of a splash to warrant talking about. But now, here's the people you were really waiting for. The moneymakers, the 12.5 characters making up 10 and 12's parties. First, the headliners, Tidus and Vaughn. On the surface, they were made from the same anime twink mold, but it's startling how much they deviate from each other throughout their respective game. I need to highlight Vaughn and his sheer gumption at the start of FF12. He is on the grind set. The orphans rely on him, but more importantly, on a narrative level, he doesn't wait for the plot to happen to him. On the other hand, FF10's opening sequence throws Tidus around like the doll he is. He gets whisked away to a hostile world where the only way out is forward. People rag on Tidus for being whiny, but the guy's in a crisis situation. He's had to deal with mortal danger, existential anguish, and actual, literal slavery. But it's not the same. Vaughn doesn't get fucked quite as bad, but the mess he ends up in is by his own actions. There's a universe where Vaughn listens to Penelo and grows old and destitute in Rabanastre. However, he doesn't. He consciously puts in the work and concrete steps needed to change his life. Sure, it was happenstance that he ran into the rest of the crew, but it was a chance that he made for himself. We even have a canonical explanation for why he can fight.
Guess I know who to call when something big comes along.
Hey, it's good practice for the desert. I'm ready for anything now.
Tidus just starts swinging that thing round. Sure, it's not outrageous to say he can do it because he's a professional athlete, but that makes me wonder, what if we gave Steph Curry a 50 caliber rifle and let him loose against the emus? As the industry standard Bishonen heroes of their respective games, they're both very plucky guys, but Vaughn is active and Tidus is reactive. At the start, FF10 is a coming-of-age story. It's true, Tidus is a passenger in Yuna's quest for a good chunk of the game, but throughout he finds his voice. He becomes knowledgeable about Spira, he stands up for what he thinks is right, and he becomes an irreplaceable influence on the people around him. Vaughn's arc is very different. He matures too. He comes to realize his dreams of sky piracy and revenge against the Empire were just escapism. He was full of initiative and drive, but lacked a true purpose to put them towards. I view this scene as a symbolic passing of the torch.
You know what? I'm through with it. I'm through running. I'm ready to find my purpose. To find some real answers. Some reasons. If I stick with you, I think I will.
You see, it was never fair to compare Tidus and Vaughn because Vaughn is not the protagonist of FF12. Ash is. Bosch may have been the original main character, Vaughn may be the viewpoint character, and Balthier might have main character syndrome, but make no mistake, the one driving this whole operation is Ash. There are teams of professional writers who struggle to write compelling girl boss characters because they never realize the blueprint is right here. Ash is all about lust. Don't get too excited, I mean lust for power. The Arcadians took her husband, her father, and her kingdom. She is hungry for any means to restore Dalmasca. Ash is fucking scary, honestly. No one's quite sure how far she'll go, but the way she pursues the Nethicite like a lifeline makes you wonder if she should have it. I wish they fully committed to giving Ash the reins. When you're in a non-combat area like a town, you're always walking around as Vaughn for the entire game. This is weird. Most games in the series let you pick who you want to walk around as, or just lock you into the main character, like Titus and briefly Yuna in FF10. I'm envisioning a cool moment in the middle of the game where they switch the perspective to Ash at some point. Something reminiscent of Kingdom Hearts 2, except Vaughn is a nobody in the pejorative sense rather than literally. Keeping Vaughn as the overworld character muddies the waters and fools people into thinking he's gonna do something. Also, we get very little introspection or internal monologue from Ash. Vaughn gets more than she does. Remember, Ash's struggle with the Nethicite is mostly internal. A lot of people sure do whisper about her and various parties try to sway her, but Ash keeps her ever-shifting attitudes to herself until the very end. Let me reiterate. Ash's struggle is internal. We don't see into Ash's head. Ash's struggle is internal. We don't see into Ash's head. Ash is the main character, and we're guessing at her thoughts and feelings just as much as the other people in her squad. No fucking shit people don't emotionally resonate with this story. Believe it or not, apart from that, I actually do like Ash. She gets shit done.
Suppose you kidnapped me instead. You're a sky pirate, aren't you? Then steal me. Is that so much to ask?
But at the same time, she's impulsive and emotional, so maybe not a great wielder of magic nukes. Her flaws are a genuine obstacle, and what helps her improve upon them are the connections she builds with the party. Bosch is a war veteran, and unlike her, he truly knows its horror. Balthier has already lost one person to Nethicite. Vaughn's unproductive, unfocused hatred of the Empire mirrors her own, and seeing him overcome that inspires her. I'm angry because it really hurts that we only get the beginning and the end of her development. But looking at Ash from a detached, analytical point of view, I think she is neat. By the time she reaches the top of the Pharos and tells the Acuria no, she won't be the next Dynast king, she won't give in to her vengeful impulses, she won't continue the cycle. It is earned, even if it doesn't feel like it at the time. Despite some storytelling blunders of truly idiotic proportions, her arc is complete. She's a product of the kind of game she ended up in and fits well into Ivalice. But if we're talking about fitting into a world, there's only one king. Titus, baby. I'm just gonna come out and say it. I love this dude. He's a little dumb and brash, but it's that exact brashness the Spirit needed the most. There's an opinion going around that Titus is an unnecessary character that distracts from Yuna's story. Allow me to relieve you of this stank-ass, ridiculous opinion. He completes this world by virtue of not fitting in. There's a maturity in his immaturity that, oddly enough, resonates with me more than ever. Yevon is a culture of stagnation. The only hope is in the status quo, and asking for more is seen as illogical. Tell me where you've heard that one before. That's childish. Things are fine as they are. If the people before you could survive in these conditions, you're entitled for wanting more.
But I want everything!
Since I first played the game, Titus has grown on me massively. Maybe it's because I have become an adult, and his coming-of-age story has come of age. Spira needed him. He showed that maturing as a person doesn't imply becoming jaded. The grown-up and rational choice, quote-unquote, doesn't have to be the one that accepts suffering. It's through his optimism that Spira was able to truly beat sin, and that's why he's one of the best isekai protagonists. Yeah, technically, Dream Xanarkin is a physical part of Spira. I don't want to hear it. For all intents and purposes, FF10 is an isekai, and it comes together thanks to a particular world-building choice. Oh yeah, you know it's Blitzball. Making Titus a Blitzball pro? Genius move. Not only does it serve as a bridge between where he came from and this new strange place, but it also lets Titus be an expert at something, like something specific, that's not just fighting good. That's important. He's not just an exposition sponge. He learns from the Spira folk, but they learn from him too. He has rare skills that make him useful, like underwater combat, a competitive mindset, and of course, being a fucking baller. So despite his stupidity and inexperience, he's on equal footing with his companions, and that's definitely an advantage he has over Ash. His links with the party are very much a two-way street, but Ash doesn't give me the same vibe. It's another consequence of this game's lack of writing. She doesn't connect with the others on a personal level much. She doesn't connect with Penelo at all. Fun fact there, literally not one conversation between these two. Well, folks, it's time for me to eat my words. Eat shit, cause I'm wrong. They actually do have a conversation, and here it is in all its glory.
What's that? I think it's the dawn shard.
Her contribution to the party amounts to being the princess and the main character. I don't know how to express this, but here's a line from Vaughn that outlines the problem.
You'll make it. You got good friends.
Like, does she really? There just isn't enough bonding between Ash and the others to justify this statement. The relationship between her and them is held together by extrinsic reasons rather than genuine camaraderie. On the other hand, here's a well-developed, balanced relationship. Titus and Yuna. They're precious. We all agree. You don't disagree, because that's illegal. Their dynamic is just chef's kiss, and there's no better example than the infamous, well-memed laughing scene. I want to put this to bed once and for all, so listen up. Without context, it's horribly awkward. It's fake laughter, it's bad voice acting. With context, it actually still is that, just not by these guys, but by these guys. Yuna lives her life on a pedestal. The people love her as a beacon of hope for Spira, but that comes with responsibility. But Titus, he's not from here. He's not conditioned to look upon summoners with that kind of reverence. He sees Yuna as a cute girl his age who grew up way too fast with an important big shot job that leaves her very stressed. With his help, she opens up around him in the party and shows off her goofy side.
A lot of fiends here, y'all. Don't talk like that.
In return, Titus realizes the immense burden she bears and learns to become someone people can lean on. They improve each other, and together they dabble in healthy coping mechanisms. Here, Yuna is teaching him to force himself to laugh, basically fake it till you make it. And what do you know, they make it. It's a perfect synthesis of Titus and Yuna's attitudes. It's not so different from putting on a brave face like Yuna's been doing all this time, but instead of doing it for someone else's sake, it's for their own. So in summation, fuck you, leave my babies alone. They're adorable in the ways they complement each other, but also in their similarities. Youth, stupidity, and overconfidence. I appreciate how much these two feel like teenagers, cause some of these ages are a little whack. Vaughn and Penelo are spot on, but would you have ever guessed that Ash is 19? My child, why are you looking for infinite power? You should be walking around a sunny university campus with a surplus of free merch right now. I absolutely thought she was in her mid-20s, but no. Okay, that's not the worst of it though. Can you believe this guy is a year older than this guy? No, I'm not accepting that. Orin is a grizzled old man in my heart. Maybe he has to be this age for plot reasons, but it's wrong that he's still young enough to get sucked into cryptocurrency. Maybe Spearin people age differently, but that doesn't explain how Balthier is 22. No one is this confident at 22. What do you mean Wok is older than Balthier? You're fucking with me. Anyway, that's my age rant done with. I disagree that it's a betrayal of Yuna's character for her to look like this in 10-2. Everyone does a few cringe things in their late teens, and Yuna's always been silly deep down. This is a tangent. This video's not about 10-2. I can't even speak for the plot of 10-2. I haven't played much of it. When I was a kid, I got a copy of it in Germany, so it was in German. I had a hard time comprehending what was happening as I was 8 years old and not German. For the record, I'm still not German. Anyway, Yuna. When it comes to boneheaded decisions, she gives Titus a run for his money. What, you stole a megaphone and started talking trash in public? That's cute. Yuna learns Seymour killed his dad and her first thought was, I'm gonna honey trap him. This guy, who can summon this fucking thing. Yuna tried to get close to this guy and didn't tell any of the 6 guardians appointed to protect her from danger about it. Even without knowing how deep this Yevon shit goes, it's suicidal. Like, Titus is a goofball, but Yuna is an agent of chaos, and she always has been.
Shoop off shook, Yuna fall in water. Shoop off scoop up Yuna with long nose. Yuna jump in 3 more times for fun.
The strong female character trope gets a bit of side-eye these days because oftentimes people are pretty lazy about writing one. It's the meta to create an unfeeling, hyper-competent ninja, give it tits, and bam, you're done. But these games put in the work to make their heroines genuinely interesting. Ash is a traditional example. She can brawl with the boys, but she still has things going on. Yuna is a smidge different. Not that different, honestly. She has a more feminine presentation, but she's as much of a fighter as everyone else.
I hope you hurt them. A little.
The point is, no one likes these two for their combat feats. They like them for their force of personality and their inner strength. And Yuna is so strong. She's the strongest person in her game, and that's including Orin. Imagine knowing you will die at 17. Not in a lethargic way where you don't believe you'll make it that far. This is the plan. You've known since you were a child. You chose this path. Suddenly you meet someone wonderful, someone free and full of life in a way you've never known. You fall in love, but you can't abandon your duty. You march forward for the mere chance of helping a world that will never have you. You find the institution that gave you your purpose is rotten to the core. The world hates you for your discovery, but you keep going. They might reject you, but they still need you. Yuna is a fucking juggernaut of a human being for resigning herself to this fate, but her greatest feat of strength is right here.
I would have gladly died. I live for the people of Spira, and would have gladly died for them, but no more. The final summoning is a false tradition that should be thrown away. I will live with my sorrow. I will live my own life. I will defeat sorrow in his place. I will stand my ground and be strong. I don't know when it will be, but someday I will conquer it. And I will do it without false hope.
Imagine you're 17 and you never planned your future. There's no need. This is the end right here. You prepared for this moment. You've made peace with it.
The healthy human mind doesn't wake up in the morning thinking this is its last day on Earth. But I think that's a luxury, not a curse. To know you're close to the end is a kind of freedom. Good time to take inventory. Outgunned, outnumbered, out of our minds on a suicide mission, but the sand and rocks here, stained with thousands of years of warfare, they will remember us for this. Because out of all our vast array of nightmares, this is the one we choose for ourselves. We go forward like a breath exhaled from the earth, with vigor in our hearts and one goal in sight. We will kill him.
But now that you're standing here, you realize you've been doing all this for nothing. You were ready to let everything go, to die for the world, but no, you need to live for the world. I can see why she got into the silly outfits now. Yuna is so brilliant because what she goes through is so viscerally tragic, and the way she struggles against her circumstances is both heartening and heartbreaking. She shoulders the burdens of other people when she's already carrying so much, both emotionally and for real. This trait is a tremendous strength and a fatal flaw. We see both sides of it, and Yuna's journey in learning to truly trust other people is compelling. As much as we admire her, we want her dwindling time and spirit to be lived freely as herself, even when her mission takes a bizarre turn. God, I can't even imagine having 60 extra years I never thought I'd spend. I get that things were finishing up by this point in the story and the pacing wouldn't allow it, but it's a damn shame we didn't get to explore this whole mindfuck in depth, cause Yuna has been through it, and she doesn't even break a sweat. She only cries when Titus has to go. Her and like 21 million others. You know who in 12 reminds me of those two? Bosch, of all people. I've already talked about how cool and kind he is. The reason he's not talked about in the same vein as like Titus is because his darkest moments just don't get that much emphasis. Like his brother Gabranth, he couldn't protect Landis from being absorbed by the Empire. Then they came for Dalmasca and he couldn't protect that either. The very people he fought for were made to hate him and 2 years of his life were stolen. Yikes bro, if I got done like that I'd be rage quitting. But Bosch is a better man than I. He keeps giving his best even if he'll never be applauded for it.
If I could protect but one person from war's horror, then I would bear any shame. I would bear it proudly.
You have been branded a traitor, but still you would fight sin. Lost to the temple, hated by the people, yet you continue your pilgrimage? Everything lost. What do you fight for?
I fight for Spira.
Bosch still believes in a bright future, a place where people like Vaughn, Penello, and Larsa can live happy lives. He'll give anything for it, and in the end he even gives up his identity as Bosch von Ronsenberg, taking Gabranth's place in a neat full-circle moment. Bosch is the other reason for Gabranth's mental breakdown.
You confound me, brother. You failed Landis. You failed Dalmasca. All you were to protect.
From an outside perspective, it looks like Gabranth got the better deal after Landis. He's powerful and a commander of the world's strongest military, but the truth is he lost a part of himself. Despite everything that was taken from Bosch, he could hold on to his ideals, and that's something Gabranth couldn't process. I really wish Bosch's resolve was tested more throughout the game, but what we got is still pretty solid. He has Titus's optimism and Yuna's sense of responsibility. He embodies the same kind of strength, but much more quietly, just supporting the people he believes in. I hope he has a nice retirement in Arcadia at least. He deserves it. There you are, you sly dog. Finally, it's your turn. Oren is, like Bosch, on a long road to recovery from his failures. But Oren gets to confront his trauma in a much more personal way. It's not just the inciting incident largely forgotten to make way for the plot to follow. Oren's anguish from 10 years ago is so relevant it needs a magnifying glass, and it gets one, thanks to some sphere recording fuckery. Thanks, FF10 Worldbuilding. Character-wise, this is a really great choice, cause Bosch kinda stagnates by the middle of the game, but Oren just keeps getting better the more we go, which is a fucking achievement, cause let me remind you, his introduction is this. He has an air of mystique around him. To Spira, he's a legendary guardian who's seen it all, the only living person to have seen Zanarkand and come back. But to two special people, Titus and, well, us, he's something different.
Who are you anyway?
Oren's the closest thing to a paternal figure Titus has had for most of his life, but he's never been talkative. The relationship isn't close. Oren isn't really his dad, and he doesn't pretend to be. He's quiet, aggravatingly so. He's not a warm person, but even then...
What am I supposed to say? You tell me it's my decision, but I don't have a choice, do I? You're the only one who can tell me what's going on anyways. I have to go with you, I have to!
Irritating, I know. Or are you afraid? It's all right.
He cares. There's nothing in his job description that makes him say,
Jecht loved you.
But it's important to him. It's with his help that Titus understands what kind of person Jecht really was. He cares about both of them deeply. The rest of the party, maybe not as much. With his status, they're basically his subordinates. If you look real hard though, there is fondness there. This scene here has been slept on for 22 years. I'm here to wake you up. Kimahri is holding Seymour off to cover the party's escape. It's the pragmatic choice. Seymour looks pretty damn scary, right? Oren encourages them to do the smart thing. Leave Kimahri. Guarantee your freedom. But one by one, the party defy him to go help their friend. You can love this scene in two layers. Layer 1, the first time player layer. It's heartwarming. The party have an unbreakable bond and Oren is swept along with their youthful courage. It brings a smile to your face. Layer 2, the repeat playthrough, and this one's interesting. Knowing what we know about Guardians and the final summoning, well, you see the resemblance here, right? It's like a beta test almost. Was Oren testing the party here? If they can sacrifice Kimahri and Bevel here, then most likely they can cope with sacrificing another Guardian for the final Aeon. But without knowing it, they prove to Oren that they can break the cycle. Or maybe in the heat of battle he forgot himself, thinking only of survival. Maybe in the party's defiance they brought him to his senses. The students have outdone the master, earning his respect and once again proving that they're ready. I'm not sure which one of these I like more, but on the subject of Kimahri specifically, in a very strange move for FF10, they leave the relationship between Oren and Kimahri very underdeveloped, considering their history. I know they're very quiet guys, but it's still very underexplored. Oren is like a well-engineered lasagna. He does a great job of enticing you to keep going and uncover what he's hiding. None of that store-bought shit. This side of Oren is already great, but put side by side with the younger Oren, that's when the character becomes really special. He used to be so adorable. There's inherent comedy in Oren being the most high-strung out of the group when he's not even the summoner. If you find all the Jecht spheres, you get to see that stick up his ass dissolve over time as he forms a proper brotherhood with Mellow Braska and Rowdy Boy Jecht. That, of course, only makes the end that much sadder.
Legendary Guardians choke sometimes too, yeah?
Legendary Guardian. I was just a boy.
Oren's love for his friends turned him inside out. The role reversal between Jecht the Maverick and Oren the Stickler is fantastic in how gut-wrenching it is. It's Oren who quote-unquote regresses into selfishness. It's not Jecht, but Oren who, much like Titus 10 years later, can't bear to let anyone go. He struggled against the power that gripped the world too tightly. He wanted everything, but he lacked the means.
I wanted to change the world too, but I changed nothing. That is my story.
Knowing all this, you realize Oren is tired, man. Of course he's laser focused on the pilgrimage like not even Yuna is. I wouldn't call it emotional repression, he just has nothing to live for, literally. The only thing keeping him going is belief. As illogical as it is, he still has that youthful streak in him.
If you live, there may be another way. We'll think of something, I know.
He has impossible faith in both Jecht and the next generation. If he couldn't change anything 10 years ago, maybe Titus and Yuna can. If I can be dead serious, Oren might be a contender for my favorite mentor character ever. It's everything about him. The backstory, the aura he exudes, the broken man underneath it all that nevertheless carried on until and after his final breath, and the satisfaction of a job well done.
This is your world now.
When I sit down and think about it, FF12 doesn't have a mentor character. There's characters that approach that status like Bosch and to some extent Balthier. Alright, segue complete, the Balthier segment has arrived. Feast your eyes upon the sexiest individual in the game, which is quite the achievement. Many people would call Balthier their favorite character, and they're all correct because everything that comes out of his mouth is gold.
And his shall be the first to fall.
Well, at least your sword is to the point.
He's something that other FF12 characters aren't. He's funny on purpose. He's always got some quip ready, which is something he actually gets from his dad. There's an intentionality to Balthier's coolness that Oren doesn't have. That guy's just like that. Balthier, on the other hand, has a crafted persona. Oren's mystery and development is not really about Oren, the monk/guardian, but the circumstances that made him the way he is. Balthier's development is mostly about watching his ruthless sky pirate facade crack to show the real him. And to be honest, it doesn't take that much to crack it. Sir, you've known this little orphan for a day, and you're ready to put your life on the line for him. He could have totally let Vaughn get triple-teamed in the dungeon and escaped, but as much as he hates to admit it, he has a moral compass. But the real meat and potatoes are when he meets Ash. Their relationship basically revolves around the source of Balthier's trauma, Nethicite.
This is the fruit of research into the manufacture of Nethicite. All at the hands of the Draclaw Laboratory.
You're a fucking ugly little cunt, mate, and if I ever see you, I'm gonna fucking slit your fucking face.
Nethicite has already stolen one person from him. Sid used to care for his son, but after Giravegan, the Sid that loved him was gone. So Balthier ran, and he's kept running, but Nethicite has a habit of catching up with him. In comes Ashelia Banargan Dalmeska! Her motivations are more noble, sure, but the lust for power is the same. For Balthier, she's a haunting reminder, but also a second chance, and so begins the most complete relationship in the game. I swear every time these two interact is iconic.
Trust me, you're better off staying here.
Suppose you kidnapped me instead. You're a sky pirate, aren't you? Then steal me.
Let's talk about that ring scene already. On the surface, Balthier is just looking to be compensated, but with context we know the truth. There's more important things at stake. It's a test of resolve. Can Ash sacrifice something dear to her in pursuit of the Nethicite? If not, she's no threat, but she can. So Balthier knows he can't leave. Along the way, Ash becomes more than a loose cannon he has to monitor, but a friend he can confide in.
The choice is yours to make, but don't give your heart to a stone. You're too strong for that, princess.
Balthier really thinks he's slick. Who should Ash give her heart to then, Your Honor, I love them. If this level of chemistry was a standard for the game rather than a highlight, it wouldn't be as maligned as it is. But alas, that's just a dream. I have a problem with how the relationship between him and Sid is resolved, meaning it's not. He obviously still has some hang-ups.
How could you do this? How could you fall this far?
He's even scared to enter Giravegan because whatever's in there took his dad from him. But then we get to the Pharos and Sid just kinda dies. This is the face I make when a fly has been struggling against my wide open window for 5 minutes and still can't get out of my room. Sid and Balthier's arc doesn't go anywhere. Balthier doesn't reflect on their relationship after the fact. It just happens. If you're astute, you've noticed a trend in FF12's characters. They have intriguing setups, but nothing is done with them. That's what happens when you forget to put dialogue in the back half of your game. Regardless, I gotta say, Balthier is awesome. We have an attachment to him because he has soul. He's a breath of life in a story that can sometimes feel sterile in the moment to moment. Here's someone a little more polarizing. Wakka. I'm not doing Wakka fans dirty, he's there to be the buffoon of the group. Some would say Tidus is the buffoon of the group, but Tidus is more so ignorant of spear and customs and somewhat reckless, not truly stupid. Now Wakka? Wakka is truly stupid, but I like that about him. He has no equal, in this game or 12. Stupid characters can still be complex and interesting, and Wakka is a testament to that. To be specific, he's emotionally unintelligent, especially concerning the death of his brother Chapu. He doesn't know why he gives Tidus his sword. He doesn't know why he hates the Al Bhed. He doesn't even know why he's so loyal to Yevon. He doesn't know that he doesn't know. The two neurons in his cavernous skull never passed close enough to each other to make that connection. The missing piece is he's still grieving Chapu, who went to fight Sin with a Machina weapon and never came back. When you say it out loud, it's a little silly, right? I get that grief does a number on you and makes you rationalize the irrational, such as, racism.
Those plastic grease monkeys!
At face value, this feels like a silly motivation, but in the cultural context of Spira and what we know about Wakka, it makes sense. Behind Wakka's bumbling disposition is someone deeply hurting, someone who never accepted his brother's fate, to the extent that even the appearance of a lookalike is enough to get him hoping again. I used to not take this fool very seriously, but he's a sad character. We'll get to Lulu in a second, but she doesn't fall down the 4chan rabbit hole despite caring about Chapu just as much. But hey, some people are just predisposed to cult-like thinking, and Wakka is a perfect mold for Yevon. Yevon has shaped his mind so completely that he'll contort his own traumas into moralistic lessons about why Yevon is right. Sin and Yevon both have made Wakka into a victim, which is why I really root for him. It's ironic that he acts like Tidus's big brother because he's got massive little brother energy. He's usually your annoying punching bag, but in rare moments, something clicks, and you get to see him grow before your eyes. It's satisfying watching him get dragged kicking and screaming to a place of enlightenment with respect to Yevon, the Al Bhed, and Chapu. When he gets over his hang-ups about fighting Seymour or Yunalesca, I'm like, fuck yeah, Wakka, every single time. That's my little brother, dammit. Lulu is in a weird spot. Her presentation is perfection in and of itself, we all know that. But she's much more low-key than the rest of the party, and she's unique in that she's important to a bunch of mini-arcs, not the big central ones. I alluded to her, Wakka, and Chapu a second ago, so let's start there. I'd say this is the most successful Lulu arc. Lulu is very unlike Wakka. She's cool, logical, and emotionally distant. She's dealing with Chapu in a quiet and dignified way, which is at odds with Wakka's copium.
And then one day, maybe they just pop back, see?
Amazing. Simply amazing. You make up one theory after another, refusing to face the simple truth. Sin didn't take Chapu anywhere. Sin crushed him and left him on the Jose shore. Your brother won't just pop back.
God damn! Lulu is mean as hell for that, but I get it. I think she snaps here because she's both frustrated with Wakka and trying to keep herself sane. I know if I was doing my best to accept and make peace with a traumatic personal loss and some dumb fuck was like, maybe he's still alive, but in the future, yeah, I'd smack him. This irrational glimmer of hope might feel great, it might be very tempting, but you know you need to fight it or your progress with the grief might unravel. This and that scene with Luzu I already talked about are genuinely poignant. They solidify the suffering people in Spira have faced for 1,000 years.
Goodbye, Chapu. You always said I looked grumpy. But those were the happiest days of my life.
Lulu's got that introverted magnetism about her. She never seeks it out, but she has a neat dynamic with most of the party members. Underneath the snark, she genuinely cares for Wakka. Riku idolizes her, which is extremely cute. Orin instantly identifies her as the smart one of the party, like that one kid in the class that the teacher somehow trusts to keep her shit together. It's no wonder she's the last one to run after Kamari and crack Orin's stoicism. Then there's Tidus. This is one of the more understated relationships in the game, but Square Enix knew what they were doing. There's a hidden affection value that represents each character's relationship with Titus, and the highest gets extra emphasis in certain cutscenes. The fastest ways to buddy up with someone are picking certain dialogue options and approaching them first on the field. You'd think every character would have an equal amount of chances to raise their affection, or maybe Titus's actual love interest, Yuna, would receive the most, but no. Lulu really makes you think, huh? Goth girls aren't just a 2024 fad, guys.
Interesting. I suppose I could add you to my list. I wish you good luck, little boy.
They have a pretty rocky start, which makes sense. Lulu doesn't suffer fools, and she didn't ask for this. Titus is here because of Wakka's delusion in the first place, but she finds herself in an educational role, dispensing lore for Titus even if she rolls her eyes doing it. Titus proves to be a good dude and an eager listener, and this might be controversial, but she ends up feeling more like a big sister to Titus than she ever did to Yuna for me. No shade at all, they just have better scenes together. Lulu has a small, optional arc devoted to her, that being her failed first pilgrimage with Lady Genom, and it sucks. Sorry. It does give a reason why Lulu is as closed off as she is, but was that necessary? Shapu is already a pretty potent reason. Hell, without that, some people are just quiet. I tried to be invested in this arc, but it does nothing for me. I just can't stop wondering how Lulu got all this way with the first tier of black magic and a magic stat of 20. No wonder Genom died. Lulu was dead weight. If we're gonna be honest, Lulu is not very impactful to anything. She's a bag of mismatched narrative curiosities wrapped up in like 15 belts. But her lack of focus makes her a great illustrator of FF10's successful character writing. Even if the plot doesn't need her at all, we love her. And that's down to the care Square Enix put into the party dynamic. FF10 would simply be lesser without her.
The Faith? What? It can sing?
Of course it can. Don't be a fool.
This is the best place to put my obligatory piece about Penelo. Like Lulu, she's also there to bounce off other characters like Larsa and Vaughn. The difference is, no one likes Penelo. She has no qualities, let alone redeeming ones. She only props other characters up. Penelo herself has the texture of airline bread. They don't even try to give her any solo arc. This concludes my obligatory piece about Penelo. Fran is interestingly placed because of her striking visual appearance. She's much more recognizable than the other characters. You'd think she's a pivotal cast member, but no, she's a part-time character. Her other jobs include being an absolute vibe,
I'm dropping it.
an ancient lore vending machine,
Fog? Underground?
Not fog. Mist.
and a MacGuffin juice container.
Such heat! The mist, it's burning!
As a Viera, she carries a lot of mystique. She's aloof, somewhat alien. She knows things about the ancient world, not at all like these pasty vanilla Humes. But she comes attached to Balthier, and they're a pretty good power duo who understand each other better than anyone else.
You are ill at ease. The Nethersite troubles you. You've let your eyes betray your heart.
Both games have a quiet, non-human character with a solo arc localized to their birthplace, and I like both of them. If you've been paying attention, you'll notice Viera are pretty rare, and it's for good reason. She's from Galmor Jungle, where if you leave for good. So what happens when Fran is forced to pay a revisit? The jungle itself has forsaken her. She can't hear its call anymore. The only people she knew as a child treat her like a stranger. Even after 50 years, Fran has her doubts, but the vulnerability she shows makes her stronger.
Listen to the wood's voice for me. I fear she hates.
It's funny, she kinda sounds like a kid searching for validation from a distant parent. When her sister Mirren tries to follow her, she says no. This path is difficult, and not everyone needs to walk it. Fran knows she made the right choice for herself, and herself only, but there is a yearning there, a bittersweetness. If she could have her cake and eat it too, she would, but she can't. She walks away. You're not gonna believe what my complaint about this arc is. Yeah, it's too short. Fran's homesickness and inner conflict about that is groundwork for a deeply emotional story, but alas, it's not the story that FF12 is interested in telling. It's a footnote in the journey, and it gets overshadowed by the political stuff in the next area pretty quickly. I understand keeping the plot moving, but Fran never mentions the wood again. Kinda like Vaughn and Bosch, she recedes into the background for later parts of the game, only to be brought out of containment for lore dumps. And honestly, her role as Balthier's pal is upstaged by Ash by the endgame. This is the perfect time to mention how fucking incredible the localization in this game is. Oh my god. god. I've already mentioned some spirited voice performances, not all of them are quite on that level, but what's consistent is how the writing and voice acting sells Ivalice as a living and diverse world.
The treaty held with kings of old is but a memory, cold and still. With you, we now shall treat anew, to cut a run for history's flow.
This isn't a happy accident. The translation team knew what they were doing. There was conscious effort to make every cultural identity map to its own accent, like Dalmascans are somewhat American.
Penello? What are you doing here?
I could ask you the same.
Arcadians are British.
So you fear the Empire?
This already gives FF10 a run for its money. Not to knock the voice acting in FF10. I like it. Some performances are more stilted than others, but it is solid. However, with some random exceptions, they all talk the same. It doesn't matter if you're Albed,
Everyone thought we were a fiend.
Yevon,
I heard that Maester Seymour and Lady Yuna are to be wed.
or from a 1,000-year-old but not really city.
Well, there are more buildings. All tall ones. And cramped together.
I'm not saying this cracks the world in two, though yeah, it's a little jarring that Dreams Anarchand and Spira somehow evolved their languages in perfect sync over 1,000 years. To their credit, the Besaida accent is pretty distinctive, even if there's no traces of it in Lulu. Sure, the Ronso have their caveman speak, and of all people, the Hypalo have this?
Impossible! Impossible!
There are a few people who talk quasi-British, but I don't get it. What exactly is the commonality between Micah, Trommel, and fucking Machen? I guess they're just old guys. They got their accent because they're old sage types. Ultimately, this is a very minor problem. It's par for the course, basically. It's functional, even if it's on the same level as me trying to bullshit a voice for a random NPC in my D&D sessions. But it makes me appreciate how such a small thing done right can really elevate the world building in FF12. I love the American Dalmascans and British Arcadians. If they stopped there, that would be fine, but no. Here's part of a 2015 VG 24/7 interview with Alexander O. Smith and Joseph Reeder, the two, yes, the only two translators for the entirety of FF12. While all the characters in the Japanese version speak and are written with unaccented standard Japanese, it doesn't make sense in the context of a global story to use the same accent of English everywhere. We often compare it to classic episodes of the British sci-fi show Doctor Who, where even aliens spoke with British accents. Modern sci-fi and fantasy requires a higher degree of reality, even if it's something as simple as the Star Wars formula of Imperial speaking British English and Rebel speaking American, which we shamelessly borrowed. It also led to interesting side cases, like that of Bujurba, a foreign land that had been colonized by the Empire some years past. We went with a Sri Lankan accent as the basis for Bujurban speech, and flavored the written language with borrowings from Sanskrit in the way that Indian speakers of English retain words from Hindi.
I am told they will depart for Rabanastar upon the arrival of the fleet this eventide.
Similarly, the Viera were given Icelandic accents to give their speech an unusual alien quality.
In vain glory they arose, shouting challenges at the gods, but prevail they did not. Their doom it was to walk the mist until time's end.
This is the coolest shit ever to me. They even gave the guy with 3 scenes his own Spanish accent.
My little birds, they tell me many, many things.
It's among the most passionate and thoughtful localization jobs I've come across. The writing and dialogue doesn't flow like a video game brought over from anime land and dubbed over. It's remarkably fluent and natural, which is a gigantic fucking accomplishment even today, let alone 2006. Anyway, unlike Mrs. Icelandic Bunny Poster Girl, poor Kamari is neglected as hell. He's never the first guy that pops into your head when FF10 is mentioned, and when he does, it's usually, oh yeah, Kamari also existed, that's right. He has connections to Yuna and Oren, both of which are so seldom mentioned I forget about them more often than not. He lacks a clear role, even gameplay-wise, which makes him difficult to use. It's not that he's unlikable. There are quiet moments in the game that show he's a cool guy underneath his unapproachable appearance.
Ronso are followers of Yevon. Ronso dislike Albed.
Oh, I get it.
Not Kimari. Albed are Albed. Riku is Riku. Riku swore to protect Yuna, and Riku is not a liar. Kimari can tell, so she is a friend.
But he doesn't have enough exposure to really make him shine except that one time. It's a simple redemption arc. Young Kimari didn't have the strength to defeat Brian, that's not his name. Young Kimari didn't have the strength to defeat Baran, and he didn't have the humility to admit that, so his horn was broken and he left the mountain. So when Kimari stops by the old village again as a fully fledged guardian, they call him unworthy. They still see him as that weak little runt, so he must prove his individual strength as a warrior. That's why I call this arc simple. There's a little hint, a little dash of getting the courage to stand up to your bullies, but Kimari's growth is really just tested on a physical level. It's petty. Given Kimari was never that important, and certainly doesn't become more important after this point, I question how necessary this whole thing was, but I'm gonna level with you here. I will defend this fight until I die. There's so many little reasons, like how Biran and Yenkei's juvenile taunts echo through the mountain, and the unique dynamics of the fight with Kimari standing firm on his lonesome while the blowjob brothers run around and harass him like the bullies they are. And of course the beautiful and frigid Gagazet theme playing throughout. You know what? This fight justifies Kimari. There's a universe where FF10 has no Kimari and the earth keeps on spinning, but I don't want to live in that world, cause this is a masterclass of presentation that earns its place in the game off of that alone. Kimari, I'm glad you and this oddly emotional scene made it in. It doesn't matter that I never used you in battle, so I had to send you out there with 600 HP and a dream. It's all worth it. I love Riku's energy, and I'm kinda obsessed with how she was almost a deuteragonist before Sin came along, but ultimately I think her late addition to the party works well. Riku is a fascinating mix of things. Get it? First of all, she's a disruptor, an irreverent outsider, somewhat overlapping with Titus, but distinct in that she knows Spira already. Just when Titus is getting to grips with his new role as a guardian, Riku makes her return. Her presence alone causes friction, and her outspokenness against Yevon brings legitimacy to Titus's own doubts about how Spira does some things. Simultaneously, she's the baby of the party, for lack of a better word. Young Sheldon, eat your heart out, cause this is how you do a gifted kid character. Riku can go toe-to-toe in debates with staunch Yevonites, but she's still emotionally fragile. She often ends up leaning on people for support, like when Waka discovers her Albed identity. It's a fascinating dynamic. Riku is basically the entire party's little sister, while still fundamentally disagreeing with them. In general, FF10 just nails Riku's high intelligence, low wisdom shtick. Her rare mechanical skills, bubbly personality, odd quirks, and unique perspective make her an enjoyable character. And that, as they say, is that. Unfortunately, in the party character aspect, there is a clear winner, which means there's a clear loser. FF12 is a mind-bogglingly ambitious game that expanded what it means to be a Final Fantasy game, but it sacrificed something that I can only describe as hijinks. Wacky hijinks had been a mainstay of this series for a while now, and oftentimes they are among the fondest memories of the older titles. Even for the games with simple writing, these moments do the heavy lifting in building genuine connection with the characters. FF10 is far from the wackiest game in the series. Now that we're in the PS2 era and everything looks more lifelike, it's harder to get away with extremely goofy stuff, but they still manage to overcome the technical burden with plenty of good party building moments.
They say Seymour went to Macarena Temple.
Macalania Temple.
Aye?
FF12 didn't manage this. Is it any wonder that the most memed line from FF12 is,
"I'm Captain Bosch von Rotzenberg of Dalmasca."
This is an attempt at hijinks, but it's diet hijinks. Hijinks 0, La Croix hijinks. Vaughn is performing these hijinks by himself, which dampens the fun of said hijinks massively. And the hijinks run out really quick, cause we have a plot to get to, I guess. It makes me so sad. This story had the potential to be one of the best in the franchise. Unfortunately, its anemic script puts it behind FF10 in character dynamics and a general capacity to evoke feelings through its writing.
You'll make it. You got good friends.
This game is like an ant farm. There's a layer of separation between me and what's inside. It's almost more fun to analyze than to actually experience, which is why I have so much to say about it. I'm not particularly attached to one ant, even if it's a very important ant or a really funny ant. There's a certain appeal to that. I haven't played many games that lend themselves to this extent of dissection, but the point is, it's impersonal. And FF10 is the diametric opposite. At this point, I hope it's obvious why people still love these characters 22 years later. There's so many parts of this game that just hit you, even after many playthroughs. When the game's not hitting you, it's winding up another gut punch. The emotional connection that builds throughout this game is nothing short of amazing in my eyes. So how can FF12 be a bigger game than this if it has so little writing? Well, we've been looking in the wrong places. Let's see what's going on beyond the bubble of the characters. This is where the game really comes into its own. I must say, I find the world building of both of these games to be two different kinds of genius. There's a somewhat common opinion that linearity in games is a concession. If you call a game linear, it can be interpreted as a criticism, and I think that there are cases where this is justified. But the other case people sometimes miss is that excessive open-endedness can gimp a game in equal measure. The tool you use don't mean shit, it's how you use it. I can't think of a better supporting example for this argument than FF10 and FF12, because these games masterfully leverage their linear and open worlds respectively. You can tell the world of Spira was handcrafted for the player experience. It's incredibly streamlined. There's a few very strong defining elements that set Spira apart from other fantasy worlds, like the setting. A lot of Spira's people are islanders, which is distinct from the usual medieval fantasy. From that we get the sport of blitzball, which is a concept so simple and so brain-dead that no one bothered to think of it before, arguably crowning it as the most iconic feature of the game. There's the Albed and their language, which is learnable in-game and in real life. There's Sin, Aeons, and the fascinating and flawed belief system that was built around those. Not every aspect of Spira is ironclad. Boy, have I disillusioned you on that front, huh? That's fine though, cause two things are achieved. The important concepts are easy to explain, and these concepts have a direct link to the plot. World-building elements are reinforced constantly by story events, so it's easy to follow. This is why FF10's linear world succeeds. It was specifically, painstakingly engineered to support the pacing of the story. You don't feel too restricted, cause Tidus is always learning more about Spira. Even if there's only one way to go, it's enough, cause areas don't outstay their welcome. Linearity is leveraged as a tool to focus the player and keep the momentum going, and it's why FF10 has that special road trip feeling. Crucially, you can't apply the same thinking to FF12. When I try to list unique aspects that distinguish Ivalice, I come up short. Stuff like evil empires, magic rocks, and airships is standard fare in fantasy, of the final variety especially. Viera are cool, obviously, but those aren't even an FF12 invention. This setting doesn't synergize with the plot contained within it, nor does it have strong features to distinguish it. So why do I love it so much? FF12's Ivalice accomplishes something Spira doesn't. Spira is delightful, it's effective, but it's not immersive. Nowhere to the same degree anyway. There's beauty in a world that's tailored to the player, but there's equal beauty in a world that doesn't give a damn. FF12 flaunts its openness very quickly. It's not like the entire world is your oyster right out the gate, but exploration is a core pillar of the game. The playable areas dwarf FF10 in size, and there's always a side quest or two that encourages you to visit and revisit more of them. Okay, you might say. I just described an open world game. What's new? So the reason FF12 exceeds the typical open world game boils down to one main thing. Content. Not just scale, as in the absolute size of the world, though that too is impressive for a PS2 game, but I mean the endless amount of quality content. Quality and quantity in droves. If you only have the first one, you get a game like FF10. If you only have the second, you get a Bethesda game.
It just works.
When I play FF12, I never feel finished. No matter how far I go, there's always more waiting. This is what immersion is to me. It's funny, we just talked about how FF10's writing lets you really empathize with its cast and FF12 feels detached, but in the world building I see it the opposite way. If I can get all pretentious for a second, the vast, reactive, and detailed world of 12 is almost like an ocean that you actually immerse yourself into. Here's the thing about FF10's side content. When I get through it, I feel like a crocodile getting thrown another carcass from the powers that be up above. Go chase some butterflies, dodge 200 lightning bolts in a row, grovel and beg the chocobo trainer to let you win the race, it's been 2 hours. The invisible hand of the developers is very much not that. You can see exactly where Square thought the game needed more stuff for the player to do. FF12's approach is a lot more tactful. Anytime you're doing something, it feels like it's of benefit to someone in the world, not just your amusement. Like how every single hunt starts with an NPC petitioner that explains exactly why they want their mark dead. Some are reasonable, some are comical, but either way it feels like you're spinning the wheels of the Ivalice economy. And speaking of NPCs, oh my god, there's so many. I haven't done any calculations, but it's pretty clear the Joe Schmo dialogue far outnumbers the story dialogue. FF10 has a few people around the place to talk to.
Stay away from the summoner! You're a bad man!
But this is Mickey Mouse scale. The only Spira town that even approaches FF12's detail is Luca. Rabanastre alone is massive, then throw in Bujerba, Nalbina, Arcades, and the smaller towns are no slouch either. It's a gargantuan effort, and it's oddly sweet. You don't have to read any of this. We're not just talking to quest givers and shopkeepers, but random-ass people on the street with their very own lives. I feel somewhat bad for anyone who bulldozed through the game Patrick Bateman style. If you stop and smell the flowers, you get to experience how truly alive the world of Ivalice is. The people have personality, regional quirks, and insights that expand the lore. But even more impressively, the people aren't just trapped in their own bubble. After several major story beats in the game, you can expect a lot of NPC dialogue to update. It feels amazing to walk around in a world that changes and evolves with the story, down to the individual townsfolk. Not that this is a unique aspect of FF12. The people of Spira do occasionally get dialogue updates too, but it's well and truly outclassed here. Hundreds of NPCs, all with several lines of dialogue, is no mean feat in itself, but making it interesting and flavorful with such consistency is amazing, and it's easy to spot naturally too. The advantage 12 has over 10 and other games is how connected its world is. The main story takes you all around the world map, and the side content earns its MVP title once more. New hunts constantly unlock, prodding you into corners of Ivalice you would have missed otherwise. Side quests like the Cockatrice Roundup have you running all over the place. FF10 doesn't benefit from that. It's linear in nature. It's excusable right up until it isn't. You see, this problem persists even after you get the airship. This should be a triumphant moment where the game really opens up, but this newfound freedom amounts to, what, 2 new dungeons? A few hidden corners of old dungeons? Woo. The world of Spira just doesn't harmonize in the same way. The side quests, by and large, do not naturally encourage exploration. Most of them are localized to the area you find them. Areas don't interlink quite like they do in 12, and you just don't have that much reason to return to many areas of the game. The side quests that aren't bound to one area just kinda have you wandering aimlessly. The monster arena is the least bad of these since it actually gives you a list of what you need to capture, but even that doesn't escape the fact that the regions of Spira were clearly designed for the express purpose of following the story path, so it feels like backtracking. FF12 doesn't really support the concept of backtracking. Where on this map is the back? It's all the world. It's just tracking. Call me Louis Armstrong, cause what a wonderful world. I'd be a criminal if I didn't stop to admire the environmental designs of both games, cause there's some gorgeous stuff here. Final Fantasy has always gone hard with its environments, but now with PS2 graphics, that work can shine like never before. 10 excels in making both the mundane and the unreal look idyllic. I'm not into camping, but if Besaid or the Moonflow were real, I'd be quick to get down there and smoke a fat,
legal plant-based substance wrapped in paper
under the stars. I always found the calm lands very beautiful. When you crest that hill for the first time and see this vast plain open up, when so much of the game has been a pretty hallway, it's one of my most underrated moments. The impossibly sheer drops and gashes in the ground from previous final summonings give this otherwise simple area a unique identity. But the game can get freaky. The Makalanya Woods are enchanting. Zanarkand, the real one, is tragic in its ruin. The far plain is a beautiful and eerie concept for an afterlife, and a huge flex for the FMV department. Inside Sin is a bizarre dimension that echoes the dreams of a people dead for 1,000 years. Wherever you are, the atmosphere is top-notch. 12 has its fair share of conventional areas, but overall it's a smidge more adventurous with its designs. FF10's world relies on a crutch named Pyreflies. The most fantastical areas of the game are basically built of the stuff. They even make Magitech-like sphere recordings and Blitzball possible. Aeons, Unsent, Fiends, and maybe people are made of Pyreflies. If I was a cruel man, I would make a joke about midichlorians. This falls in line with FF10's simple and focused world-building strategy. On the other hand, FF12 is more fast and loose, even whimsical sometimes. Often we don't even get an explanation for why things are how they are. To be fair, FF12 does rely on Mist, a similarly broad concept, but not to the same extent.
Not fog. Mist.
This game's good at a very specific technique in location design, taking a stock RPG dungeon concept and twisting it just a little. The Ogier Yensa and Nam Yensa sand seas are seas made of sand. It acts like water, the natives swim through it, but it's sand. Something like that really butters my egg roll. Maybe I'm weird for this, but it's like the quintessential FF12 dungeon for me. You have to navigate these abandoned oil rigs, a lot of them actually, but I never find it boring. It really feels like a treacherous journey journey through a place forsaken by man, and the solitude of the desert brings a certain vibe in itself. But I must admit, getting a 70 kill streak on these little goblins is half the fun. Maybe I judged Anakin a little too harshly. Shout out to the Lusu mines, which is, to no one's surprise, a mines level. Except you're on the floating continent of Bujurba. You're delving deep down into gloomy mine shafts and rock tunnels, but all of a sudden you spot what can only be sunlight. You approach and step out onto a bridge. The wind's in your hair and beneath you is the earth, far, far below. Ah, it's so cool. The world of Ivalice plays with JRPG conventions in an elegant way. It's original and separates itself from the rest of the pack, yet it's familiar and natural enough to feel like I could live there. In my eyes, Spira accomplishes the first part easily, but not the second. If I had to throw shade on Ivalice, I'd say the color palette is a little lacking. Compared to FF10, this world looks like a rich person home. But I can forgive that. It's a more grounded take. A lot of love went into these areas, from the three-tiered structure of Arcades to the weather system in Giza to the grandeur of the Pharos, which has one of the coldest establishing shots of all time. What gets me is how much of this is completely optional. You've got the Zertanan Caverns, which are especially cool because they connect several early story areas. There's plenty of chances to wander in by accident and learn the true meaning of suffering. You've also got the Sorobi Steppe, the super scary Nabreus Deadlands and Necrohall of Nabudis, and this one's a shocker, Nalbina Town. I don't know if anyone did this the first try or any try, but you can completely avoid this area for the whole game. That blew my mind when I discovered it. Let me know if you knew that. These 5 might not sound so crazy compared to FF10, which has 3, Omega Ruins, the Cavern of the Stolen Faith, and Remium Temple. But a good half of FF12's dungeons have optional revisit areas which often dwarf the mandatory portions in size and complexity. It's not just about coming in, big dick swinging with a massive explorable world, it's what's in it too. I'm gonna expose myself for the insufferable nerd I am, so FF12 has a bestiary. This is not a series first. Later versions of FF6 have one, and many Final Fantasy games have scan abilities. A little flavor text and some clues on how to beat the enemy, but FF12 takes it to a whole new level. This is no mere strategy guide, it's an encyclopedia. Every type of enemy has a solid page of flavorful, prosy description told in-universe. Here's a list of creatures that don't have an entry: Vossler and Vayne. That's it. The other 384 enemies all have one. At least one. By the way, shout out to the monster designs. They're beautiful in both games, but the FF12 monsters take the cake for me. Even the palette swaps try to do something different sometimes. It's a joy to discover all the beasties and their variants you'll be fighting in a new area. Look at the mimics. Look at these different flans. Look at this cactoid. Look at it. But that's not the true power of the bestiary. Wait for it. Boom. Page 2. If you kill a few of the same enemy, you unlock a second entry for it, but the kicker is it's not about that enemy. Sometimes it's thematically related, but you can get anything in here. There's diegetic hints on how to craft some bizarre equipment. There's background information on many aspects of Ivalice. And in a move resembling the more interesting books of Skyrim and Oblivion, there's even a few stories, including a creation myth and an account of how mimics were made. If you're willing to dig for it, there's a beautiful world waiting for you. It's a lot of reading, admittedly. The game is optimized for people like me who spend their time reading about fictional bird monsters instead of talking to women. I'm glad Square Enix were able to fit this in without disrupting the player's experience, because it's these kinds of little things that elevate Ivalice from a simple game world. This is a solid fantasy world. Now, I don't mean to neglect 10. Simplicity is a strength in itself, a very powerful strength in fact, because it brings accessibility. The world building here is light enough for anyone to remember its strong points while plot is happening. When I think of Spira, I think of the mysticism and corruption of Yevon, the tragedy of the final summoning, and the fucking audacity of Blitzball. When I think of Ivalice, I think of Ivalice, holistically. Every feature forms together into a truly cohesive and immersive experience. FF12's cohesion and resulting lack of an easily memed X-factor does make it less sticky for casual players, but I think this sacrifice was worth it. Just this once. There is enough care in this world to somehow make that work. That being said, FF10 does have one ace in the hole to tie its world together. This is Nobuo Uematsu. You might have heard of him. In the world of video game composers, his name comes up as one of the greatest of all time. Final Fantasy was certainly lucky to have him. No one has ever expressed this better than Jeremy Johns in his review of FF6.
For comparison's sake, imagine Paint to a painter is like an orchestra for a composer, in which case using 16-bit Super Nintendo MIDI technology to create music would be like a painter painting with Crayola crayons. What did Nobuo Uematsu do with that technology? He created the Sistine Chapel with Crayola crayons, metaphorically speaking.
Yeah, he really is that good. To be honest, I don't think the series would be anywhere near its success without him. So what happens when he's gone? FF12 is notable as the first mainline title without much involvement from Uematsu, as he left the studio in 2004. He composed the ending theme, and that's it. It's not like Uematsu has had a complete monopoly on the music until now. Even for FF10 he had help, but in this game he's very much a guest. The soundtrack for FF12 is helmed by Hitoshi Sakimoto, who previously worked on the tactics games, and he does a good job, sometimes even a great one. Sakimoto specifically avoided taking too much inspiration from Uematsu's work, falling in line with FF12's rebellious teenager-esque attitude to series trends. His music is in harmony with many things in the game. It seamlessly blends into the scene and atmosphere. There are some bombastic tracks for sure, like the final boss theme, but they're an exception. Remember, there's no random encounters, which means no battle theme. The overworld themes are what you're hearing 99% of the time, so it's important not to fuck them up. And he did not. Some tracks are more boring than others, but there's some lovely little ditties in here, and all of them are excellent at bolstering their respective areas' atmosphere. The fundamental difference between these two soundtracks is that 12 has atmosphere, and 10 has raw bangers. Plus atmosphere. While there's a handful of FF12 tracks I would listen to on my own, FF10 is wall-to-wall with pieces I may just be humming on my deathbed, perhaps after. Uematsu's work tends to do that. Unlike Sakimoto, his music is not content with a background role. It's a spectacle on its own. Does that mean it sacrifices a certain amount of atmosphere? Well, yes, but actually no. In case you didn't figure it out already, I know next to nothing about music theory or even music practice. I just know this shit sounds good. FF10's vibes and impactful moments are almost always spearheaded by a fitting and beautiful piece of music. It's a focal point rather than an enhancer, if that makes any sense at all. It doesn't stop there. FF10 directly incorporates its soundtrack into its world building. When you think about it, it's kinda risky to do this, right? To put your original work of art into your bigger original work of art diegetically like this. It's gotta be good enough to live up to whatever reputation it has in universe. And thankfully, the Hymn of the Faith absolutely does. I fully buy that Jecht has an attachment to it, cause damn, I hum it all the time too. It's fittingly haunting for a theme of Yevon, and using it as a way to pacify sin feels believable. Except for the part where people down here are singing loud enough to hear it up here. Yeah, in summation, the FF10 soundtrack is real good. The biggest blessing this game received might just be Uematsu, his potential unleashed on PS2 hardware. And just quickly about the remastered soundtracks, they're fine. People mourn 10's treatment like it's their husband who never made it back from the war, but that's nostalgia goggles. I will say 12 got the better end of it 100%. The new high quality arrangements make it pop a lot more. And there's even some brand new tracks. That's an upgrade where I'd call 10's remaster a side grade. They definitely bungled a few tracks, but they improved a lot of them too. Actually, it's kind of a microcosm of how I view the progression of these games as a whole. I think certain people appreciate 12 a lot more now than before because the game is somewhat of an ugly duckling, both in the sense that people were not ready for this dramatically different experience, and subsequent releases of FF12 have smoothed out its rough edges. Let's take licenses, for example. You got a new weapon or spell, gotta get the license.
Good evening, sir. I certainly hope you've got a license for that night. Well, no, I don't. No? Then in that case, in the name of the Queen!
In the original game, all characters shared the same board, so the only difference between them was their starting position. Does this remind you of something? Yeah, this is just the sphere grid, but depressing and square. The International Zodiac Job System release fixes this by adding the last 3 words in the title and removing the first, cause this version never left Japan. There's 12 different license boards, or jobs, that each character can pick one from, which forces characters to specialize. The game really needed this overhaul. It's a lot more drastic than what the international version of FF10 did, adding an alternate sphere grid that's shaped different, and not actually changing the mechanics at all, which is fine, because they got their system right the first time. The Zodiac Age takes this idea further by letting characters choose 2 boards instead of 1, growing the number of possible job combinations by a factor of just over 6 if you're pedantic, but 5.5 if you're normal. Unfortunately, the devs forgot to rebalance the game in light of this significant significant power boost, so this version is easy as pie, and that hurts. Both games add some content in their international version, and it's welcome. The Dark Aeons and Penance bring more endgame content to a game that sorely needed it, even if putting some battles in without warning is extremely mean. Geez, I miss Besaid Village, let's pay them a visit, yeah? Way to encourage exploration there, guys. For FF12's part, Trial Mode actually gives purpose to the super endgame gear you can craft. Good job all round. Humility is a virtue. It does kinda feel like an admission of defeat to add a 4x speed button to your game, but sometimes FF12 is just slow as shit, and I'm glad this is recognized. With more powerful hardware available, there's another factor speeding up gameplay, the removal of effect capacity, which was a hidden queue system for flashy attacks to protect the already overworked PS2, but now everyone can blast at full speed. Between those changes and various others like license board resets, Gambit presets, and autosaves, the Zodiac Age feels like a game that can finally breathe. FF10's HD remaster is conservative in comparison, basically a shiny coat of paint. That's fine. It's good quality paint. That's all it needed. Seems to me Square Enix thought 10 was complete as it was. When it came out in 2001, it wasn't butting heads with its limited hardware, and its mechanics were streamlined and efficient on first pass. So unlike 12, there wasn't a need to push the game a little more to help it fulfill its potential. This is the section where I treat the video games like video games and not stories. The battle systems in these games take tried and true systems from previous ones and successfully add their own pizzazz. 12 especially has a reputation for shaking the Final Fantasy battle formula to its core with its active dimension battle system. But don't be fooled, at its core it's still the active time battle system featured in most titles up to now, which I recently learned is patented. Well, by the time this comes out it won't be so recent, whatever. Bar fills up and you take an action. That's ATB for you. They've switched up the order of operations here, but it's still very much familiar. It's everything around the battle system in 12 that makes it so interesting. For 10's part, it puts its spin on a turn-based battle system, which was previously featured in, chess, Monopoly, baseball, and the really old Final Fantasy games. The conditional turn battle system, as it's called, is fascinatingly dynamic for a system where time stops while you select your move. Big, powerful attacks like overdrives have a long recovery, while some actions are quick and you'll get another turn sooner. Sometimes you could go twice or 3 times in a row with good planning and circumstances. This would be chaotic if not for the CTB bar visualizing turn orders somewhat reliably. It's intuitive enough that players can understand it simply, and it goes 16 turns in advance, which is a lot of information to leave at the player's disposal. A player with good game knowledge is rewarded with control over the battle, though the game seldom gets hard enough to require absolute precision with your turn economy. I'm gonna get a little blasphemous here. In previous generations, ATB was serviceable, but it was a necessity of its time. The older games can be seriously sluggish. 7 is a great example for this, because the wind-up animations are longer than the development cycle of Yandere Simulator. If I have to watch Ying contemplate his fucking life decisions before Yang contemplates those same life decisions before they come to a consensus and finally launch a painfully slow barrage of attacks every turn they get, one more time, I'm gonna snap. Speeding up animations doesn't fix the core issue. If you've played an ATB game, you've run into this scenario. There's the enemies on one side, on the other there's the party, and then there's you doing sweet fuck all waiting for someone's bar to fill up. Then the enemies get their turns first and peck away at your party one by one, and whatever surface you happen to be sitting on becomes a cuck chair by default. My frustratingest moments from these RPGs are in these exact wasted seconds in every single random encounter interrupting my progress. In my opinion, this bullshit is the biggest single factor that dates the older games, and I am so thankful both 10 and 12 mitigate this in their own way. In the case of 10 CTB, you get instant feedback. Either someone is doing something, or you're planning your next move. Another thing, making party switching free in the middle of combat? Love it. It really encourages making use of your entire party's talents. In fact, it's a little too good at that. If you're like me and you're invested in maintaining a well-balanced party, you have to contrive reasons to give every party member a turn in every battle. And it obviously makes no sense that your entire party accepts death when the front 3 members go down, but those are small and acceptable nuisances. All put together, FF10 has made something incredibly flexible. It allows for a lot of strategic depth, yet feels simple and responsive. Though 12 is regarded by most people as the oddball of the series, and those people are right, this is a case where 10 is the more innovative game. The ATB system in 12 has one important improvement. The denizens of Ivalice have abandoned their sense of decorum and just attack when they can rather than waiting for someone else's animation to finish. Well, unless there's too many particles on screen, I guess. This in itself already helps move things along, but more importantly, no fucking random encounters, baby. Oh my god, thank you. So the timing of CTB was kinda tragic. I think FF7 or 8 would have slapped with the CTB system, but in our timeline, the world got one Final Fantasy CTB game before pivoting to more action-y gameplay. Obviously, CTB doesn't jive with that. Fun fact, at some point in 10's development, they were gonna have enemies appear in the overworld, but due to technical limitations, they just couldn't do it. But FF12 skips that step. Instead of just being able to see the enemies, why not fight them in the overworld too? This is such a good decision, especially for the kind of game 12 is. Random encounters are like pickles. Some people find comfort in them, but I fucking hate them. They add a completely unnecessary pressure to optimize the route players take through the world. Since encounter chance usually correlates with distance traveled, exploration carries risk. If you see something off the beaten path, that basically guarantees you'll get another encounter or two in the tall grass. A part of that sounds cool, but this kind of risk is not fun. Not in practice. Not in these games. You know what's worse than trudging through 2 waves of fodder enemies for an out-of-the-way chest that has not inside but a bottle of fantasy cough syrup worth 50 gil in any shop? The walk of shame coming back and fighting 3 waves. FF games, including 10, are not very hard on a fight-to-fight basis. 99% of the time, managing resources like HP, MP, and items between save points is not a strategic problem that's difficult enough to engage players. After all, that's what combat is for. When you dare to explore, what you're really risking is your sweet time. And above all, there's something instinctively frustrating about being interrupted. The seamless combat in FF12 feels great. Exploration still carries a cost. You will encounter more enemies the more you explore, but you can see them coming. And importantly, you can choose not to engage at all. The time lost from a bad turn is minuscule. This flows way better, and also, it opens up a fun possibility, giving players the heebie-jeebies. In FF10, you can't just do the dinosaur. That wouldn't be fair. If you rolled that random encounter, you'd be fucked, no two ways about it. In 12, it's fine for them to strategically plonk absurdly strong enemies where the player could venture, and this was done excellently in multiple flavors. There's the idiot filter that I mentioned earlier, then there's a simpler variant, strong mobs that are aggressive but you can stay away from them. You can technically explore areas like the Feywood and Nabudis very early, but you won't. Unless you take the time to grind first, or you're a knowledgeable madman getting for that Zodiac Spear or trying to skip the Elderworm boss. There's more complex variants too, like the Elementals, which are usually chill dudes unless you cast magic anywhere near them. It's fun. It makes you think 3-dimensionally about where you're going and how you approach certain areas, but on a caveman brain, visceral level, I do love a good Scooby-Doo chase scene. But leaving the exploration aside, does this enhance the combat itself? Well, less than I wanted it to. The freedom of movement opens up some limited tactical options like kiting, using ranged weapons, and spacing for AoE attacks, but this is disappointingly irrelevant by and large. The game doesn't get that much harder if you let go of the left analog stick on every battle like some deranged purist. The areas of effect for enemy moves aren't telegraphed and oftentimes cover large areas, making them hard to exploit, and you can only manually move one character at a time anyway. The real missed opportunity though? Environmental gimmicks. I'm pretty sure they only do this once in the game with Firemane. If you or it are standing in the water, its attack pattern changes. I'm a little boggled by the inclusion of all these stellar environments without considering the player might want to interact with them or make use of the 3D space in general, especially when FF10 does this better somehow. There's not even any red barrels around the place or anything, that's just a crime against gamerkind. The real innovation in FF12 is the controversial Gambit system. The gameplay itself is a common complaint, which... Gambits basically let you program your characters. If this condition is true, do this. But ultimately, Gambits aren't the primary decision maker, it's the player. The combat in FF12 brings a different kind of satisfaction from the previous games. Between gearing up your characters and configuring their Gambits, you're constructing a well-oiled machine that you can unleash upon the mooks of Ivalice. But as you grow more capable or Ivalice throws new situations at you, your machine must adapt. You'll have to adjust your Gambit setup or throw in some manual commands, which you can do at any time. Sure, in standard areas with weak mobs, the game is basically an auto-battler, but what are you missing really? If anything, it's carpal tunnel syndrome. I like the combat in the older games, but in 10, for example, when I come across the same formation of enemies for the 4th time, I've already figured it out. If I feel like keeping up in levels, I need to punch in the same combination of buttons to win in more or less the same way. It's tedious. Why would you pine after that? In this game, the tedium of repetitive encounters is a much smaller problem, because 1, you're moving and exploring the map at the same time, and 2, using the gambit system feels less like fighting isolated waves of enemies and more like you're up against the entire dungeon at once. It's a dynamic different to what we're used to. The ecosystem of monsters within the dungeon is a puzzle to solve in and of itself. Theoretically. Just bear with me for a second. I gotta give shoutouts for giving you so much control over your party in such a fast-paced battle system. Most games don't try this hard. For example, in Kingdom Hearts, Sora's back is hurting most of the time. There's a reason Donald healing became a meme. I haven't played FF7 Remake, but from what I've seen, the party members you're not controlling may as well be lobotomized. It's a hard thing to do, obviously. One player can't control more than one character in real time with much granularity. In a menu-heavy game like 12, that would be way too many inputs. Gambits circumvent this limitation and let the player make life easier for themselves in the way they want it. But when a tough encounter comes by, the game slows down. When the boss pulls some wild shit, you need to take the wheel. Gambits are flexible to the level of challenge you're facing. They automate the parts that you could do in your sleep, if you configure them right. The issue with gambits, and what I think is the crux of people's complaints, is that configuring the gambits right is way too easy.
That can't be it. Where's the rest of it?
This is veering into ideas guy territory, but by now I've earned the right to be a bit obnoxious, and some would say I've been exercising that right since the start. Potato potato. I don't think Square committed to this gambit system as much as they could have. The ecosystem of monsters within the dungeon is a puzzle to solve in and of itself. Unfortunately, the solution to these puzzles has the same shape 99% of the time.
That's right. It goes in the square hole.
Yes.
That one.
Also the square.
It goes in there. It goes in the square hole. The square hole. It's the square hole. That's right. The square hole. We have the arch.
The arch. The arch.
You guessed it.
The arch.
It goes in the square hole.
Bar some niche fights, there's not much incentive to alter your gambits accordingly. Most of my gambit changes personally happen when I get a new ability to play with. It's good to have that at least. But say in FF10, the approach to each battle is heavily dependent on the type of enemy until you become god through sphere levels, I guess. Tough enemies need piercing weapons, nimble enemies need terminal velocity blitzballs, etc. FF12 is basically enemies need weapons. Instead of learning every enemy formation, you just learn how to fight enemies once. Of all the things in 12 that were ahead of their time, gambits are the most that. What we got is okay, but these feel like the bones of what could be a really top-shelf, engaging, unique one-of-a-kind system. Though even with today's tech, it's probably a hard task. I'm imagining a game that really takes this ecosystem of monsters as your opponent concept to its logical conclusion, where every area demands a different set of automated instructions to efficiently clear it, like a reverse tower defense where we are the balloons. Of course, the question is how you would make every area unique. With 12's level of complexity, you probably can't. There's only so many ways to make an enemy deader, and you'd need to add way more conditions, as well as leaning into the programming angle properly and adding branching paths and loops and stuff. This also might be a good time to incorporate the environment like I mentioned earlier, or let you move characters with gambits to take advantage of spacing. But then again, that sounds pretty hard to learn, and the game should be beatable by the average player. Yeah, I can see why Square hasn't bothered revisiting this, it hurts my brain. Overall, I still like gambits. The gameplay loop of killing mobs, growing stronger, and picking up new ways to kill things works well enough for me, especially with how easily it flows. Between 10 and 12, the one I prefer depends on my mood. 10 has a deeper system, but I hate random encounters, and being able to walk around while fighting feels awesome, even if it's less involved on average. Battle systems notwithstanding, I've noticed another interesting difference: the abilities you actually have in combat. FF10 does something I love, giving status effect responsibilities to physical attackers. There's nothing wrong with making it magic like usual, but the distribution of status moves throughout the party really gives every character some utility. MP isn't a dump stat for certain characters, everyone has a use for it, like Time Warp, Portable Mute Button, and Power Break. Oh, you can still throw Gil at people, good to know. There's some sick new additions too, like the Null Element spells, which are situational but cool when you time them right. The highlight though has to be Riku's Mix Overdrive, obviously. It's like Skyrim alchemy, but fun. I swear I like Skyrim, it's just very easy to dunk on. If you're new, it's fun to try out recipes, and if you know the game, there are some absolutely busted things you can make with it. 12 is more whimsical in its execution, but maybe not more elegant. What the heck is a numerology? Soul Eater? Horology? The game has the standard FF trappings, and then a few things the devs just fucked in there cause they could. Numerology does 1 damage and doubles that damage every hit, resetting on a miss. Traveler does damage based on your step count. Horology does damage based on your in-game timer. The exact mechanics of these are just not explained in-game, and even if you figure them out, they're pretty hard to use, and good luck trying to integrate them into your gambits. I mean, it is harmless, you can just not use them, and at least Traveler gets some use in speedruns. And there's other cool things like reverse, decoy, and balance. I admire the bravery, and I don't mind having some wacky impractical options, but I do admire the sleekness of FF10's move pool as well. In a similar vein, the sphere grid? Nice. Simple, hands-off leveling systems are fine, but this is fun. Everyone's a winner, except Kimari, who's the literal blueprint for any jack-of-all-trades, master of none. Like any good self-respecting board game, there's plenty of ways to bend the rules. We can find rare spheres that let you teleport around the place, learn skills someone else already has, and turn blank nodes into ones that give you stats. Now I understand why I dislike the original license boards from 12. Imagine the sphere grid without any of the carefully intentioned paths or gimmicks that make it satisfying. A part of this comes from the absolute freedom 12 gives you with respect to equipment. Anyone can use anything. Clearly, the original system was meant to be the player's oyster. Build your party however you like. But constraints are important. The license board didn't have those, and you know what people did? They grinded LP and made a Deathbringer wielding clone army. I figured out that strategy at the ripe age of 8. The job system introduces funky new mechanics like islands of licenses that you can only reach by unlocking a specific Esper, making you choose very carefully where Espers should go. Finally, these things have a purpose, since you're sure as hell not using these frauds in battle.
In this Esper we now command rests a power whose worth is beyond any measure.
They really did just see how overpowered the FF10 Aeons were and overcorrected, huh? Oh, and on the Zodiac versions, if you buy a license on one board, it also unlocks on the character's other board if it's there, letting you teleport. Now this is a lot more fun. The sphere grid is still more fun, but this is a system I can respect. It still could use some tuning. If you're diligent about fighting random mobs as you go, you will likely run out of places to spend your LP in the back half of the game. The sphere grid, on the other hand, will take you far beyond the main story, which is also a problem. The post-game of FF10 has more grind than Skate 3. The post-game content amounts to getting the celestial weapons, which have side quests ranging from cute minigames to the manifestation of hell, a neat dungeon in the Omega Ruins, and a whole lot of monsters that you have absolutely no hope of beating. So what do? Farm.
I'm tired of this, Grandpa! That's too damn bad!
AP, stat spheres, rare items for equipment and mixes, there's so much. Even if the overpowered kaiju battles are fun, in order to have a fair shake at them, there's a barrier of entry. You must work your shift down in the experience mines. Or just use Zanmato, I guess. FF12 barely feels like it has a post-game. You've most likely been doing optional content as you go, and this is just more of that. It's not like there's no grind. You'd want to prepare for things like Yasmat and trial mode, but you have optional shit to do as part of that prep that's not just pure grinding trash mobs. This smoother progression curve, I think, helps FF12 feel more natural in the endgame. Something I always forget about both of these games is that they have equipment crafting systems. Sure, the bazaar is flavored as a shop, but materials come in, gear comes out all the same. What a funky little addition. You basically don't know what you're paying for until you buy it, and theoretically you would maybe consult the bestiary entries to find recipes, but not one single FF12 player on this sweet earth did that. We all know this. On one hand, I love the flavor of this system. It wraps the crafting and the economy together into a neat package. I find it very cute that instead of directly earning gil from battles, you make your money by selling the spoils. It's another little decision that enhances the immersion of Ivalice, and it balances out FF12's economy, which I find holds up pretty well for most of the game, but at the end of the day, the bazaar is just too opaque to be tactical. There aren't many occasions to be intentional about what loot you sell, and when there are, you have no idea when. FF12 does like obscure mechanics that punish you for things you have no reason to know in advance. Opening this chest here, or a bunch of other random-ass chests locks you out of getting the Zodiac Spear in this chest, which is fucking here. Funny how these things work out. Of the two games, FF12 puts way more importance on equipment for character progression rather than levels or stats. But it's actually 10 with the more robust crafting system. Shame I never use it. That's a joke. I've dabbled. So you know when you have a stock of powerful items, but you're in a perpetual state of saving them for later until suddenly you've saved the world with 60 elixirs to spare? This equipment system manifests that exact phenomenon at a truly glorious intensity. Like, I apply a few statuses here and there, cause you can just buy those ingredients, but when a recipe calls for an item you can't replace easily, I get scared. Because what happens if I waste this item I can't get back and then a newer, shinier weapon comes along? wrong. And because of the limited slots, I will never add something like magic plus 10% because that would mean I miss out on a potential magic 20% down the line. You get the picture. This problem disappears if you have knowledge of the game, but bear in mind that by the end of the story you can just go get the celestial weapons, kinda eliminating half of the need for crafting. I've seen challenge runs and modded playthroughs do more interesting things with this system, and this is where it really shines. If you know exactly what ingredients you need and where to get them and have the patience to farm, you can acquire some busted gear early on to help you conquer whatever NSG, NS, NO, NCAA, BYOB, LMFAO playthrough you're going for. But otherwise, it's an awkward middle ground for first-time players and casuals who don't like parting with their items. Or at least that's my impression. Feel free to tell me I'm full of shit in the comments. I guess that applies to anything I've said in the last... How long has this been going? Oh, fuck. Okay, so if there's one intangible difference that makes these games so distinct from each other, it's that one game is polished and the other is tidy. 12 is very polished, kind of a technical marvel if we're honest, but underneath its beauty lies a tangle of inconsistently realized ideas and grand promises that weren't always kept to standard. But with the sheer volume of intriguing setup that 12 offered, delivering on even half of that still nets you a pretty impressive product, which is why a lot of people still love this game. It was famously stricken with development hell, even losing Yasumi Matsuno, the original executive producer and director, midway through. I didn't mean to make it sound like he died, the guy's still kicking. He even came back to work on a few FF14 scenarios. Some people blame the game's problems on his departure and the people who replaced him, but this is greatly exaggerated. By the time he left, the game was pretty far along. It was too late for an overhaul in mechanics or story. They were only tweaking things by this point, and as I've already made clear, that phase of development went just fine. The game is just plain weird. Not in the way 11 is weird for an FF game, where it's hard to even mention it in the same sentence as all the others, though it does have a younger sibling in 14 now, I guess. Still, 11 often gets left out of FF discourse because it's an MMO. In that awkward period between 11 and 12's release, I wasn't even aware of Final Fantasy. I was busy learning how to count and spell, but this seemed like a pretty chaotic few years to be a fan. The newest main title was an MMO. The previous one got an extremely wacky sequel. They even made a very dumb FF7 movie, which I have a soft spot for. Like, what was going on here? When 12 turned out to be single player, I imagine people sighed in relief. Ah, finally, a return to normalcy, they said, not comprehending what was about to happen. This game is weird on a fundamental level. It's a game unlike any other game, and I think in these turbulent times, people were just looking for a game that was like Final Fantasy. 10, on the other hand, is tidy. It does what 12 doesn't. It lives up to its potential. Very little is wasted. The writing, music, and mechanics work together to create the experience Square wanted. The story portion of the game, at least. They don't sustain that for the endgame, but that's fine. Sane people will just skip that. I think this is reflected in how this very video turned out. Unlike 12, this game doesn't often leave me wondering how much better it could have been. I haven't been counting, but it feels like I've been giving 12 more attention. I don't mean to be biased. I just think the untapped potential of that game and its fascinating mixture of good and bad qualities make it very ripe for discussion. 10 is a way jankier game. You'd think it'd be easier to poke fun at. It looks and sounds clunky in comparison. I mean, Square were still learning how to use the PS2 and getting into this whole voice acting business. But this is superficial. The game is an overwhelming success. A masterclass of efficiency so wonderful that even with the lack of polish, it hits the emotional beats it was aiming for. Everything works so well under the surface that the jank becomes a part of the charm, and as a result, the game has greatly benefited from being the first FF game of its generation, just like 7 before it. There's been some rumors around a potential FF10 remake, but is this really the game that would most thrive from the FF7 treatment? Monetarily, yeah, I guess. It's the easiest cash grab since the invention of mugging, but it's already such a nice, self-contained experience that any remake attempts would feel unnecessary. Hell, 10-2 is unnecessary, but at least that doesn't try to replace something that is already the most successful version of what it could be. A remake of 12, with proper justice being done for the characters and perhaps some more actiony elements like positioning, could elevate this game to something really one of a kind.
Like that's ever gonna happen.
So where does that leave this video? I sure discussed these two games. If you made it this far, subscribe or don't subscribe, thanks for indulging this horrific Frankenstein of a project. My affinity for these games ebbs and flows as other things grab my attention. You know, the Fortnites, the Lethal Companies, and yeah, other Final Fantasy games.
I get it.
But I always come back. From PS2 to 3 to 4 to PC, I always end up giving Square my money for re-releases of the same games, like it's FIFA or something. And to me, that's the mark of a classic. Yeah, these games are classics now. When you think of games from 20 years ago, something like Mario Bros might spring to mind, but nope. FF10 can have a drink in the US. FF12 can have a drink in Ireland. Ratchet and Clank and Tony Hawk's Underground are going to college. Yep, you're old, I'm old, so before I get wheeled off to my bingo, one last thing. Which of these fine games is actually better? If you got through this video and you thought the answer was gonna be anything but it depends, you're a sucker. It depends, okay? What do you value in an RPG? Right now I'm speaking to the people who haven't touched either of these games but watched the video anyway. If you want something perfectly tuned, an unforgettable adventure right out of the box, or you haven't played an FF game before, start with 10. It appeals to basically everyone and it's a fantastic experience from beginning to end. If you prefer a little more freedom, a game that will only give you as much as you give it, a world that rewards curiosity, play 12. To the people like me who've been through both of these, well, I hope some of this resonated with you, made you laugh, or widened your perspective on these games. Finally, to the people who've only played one of them, I have nothing to say to you really. Go play the one you're missing and come back to this video for the parting words I gave those who did both.